Welcome to Fanfiction Audiobooks. Marvel Salted Fish Kryptonian. Chapter 81 Attending the Banquet. Following Tony Stark, who was wearing a custom-made suit but without a tie or bow tie, with the first button even more open, Henry was glad that he had given up the soaked suit he had bought and rented another one instead. Even though he couldn't tell the difference between a handmade tailored suit and a cheap one with his current fashion sense, he was able to at least maintain a level of decency. Holding a bouquet of yellow roses mixed with lilies. This is the etiquette for first visits in the United States. You can also give a small gift or bring a bottle of wine. Considering the other party's wealth, he probably couldn't give him a gift or wine that he would like, so Henry brought a bouquet of flowers. In fact, from the moment Henry appeared with a bouquet of flowers, Tony Stark had been laughing all the way, laughing in a very obscene way, making the Kryptonian's fist itch again, wanting to punch the future Iron Man in the cheek. Henry used great willpower to control his impulse, and then used 120% of his best actor ability to control his facial muscles and put on a kind and friendly smile. His smile made Mr. Stark's back shiver. The family dinner was held at the Stark family's villa in Beverly Hills. However, Tony did not live there, so he came from somewhere else. On the way, Henry asked Tony nervously, "Why did Ms. Hepburn choose to stay at your villa?" "I told you, she's living in Connecticut now that she's retired. When she comes to Los Angeles, she mostly stays in hotels. But when some old friends get together, they always need a venue, so they'll borrow my villa. Sometimes she'll even stay there." "So, your family has a good relationship with Ms. Hepburn?" Henry thought for a moment, then suddenly realized something. "Oh, no, that's impossible." "Shut up. I think you're thinking something very rude. If you're going to say anything you shouldn't, get out of here." Tony Stark had no desire to discuss the affairs of his elders. As for Henry, he wondered if the Howard Stark of this world lived such a wild life. Did he ever fail to capture any girl from the Golden Age? The Stark family's villa in Beverly Hills is in no way inferior to the one Henry had seen before, which was rented by a banquet company. The house itself was rather old-fashioned, like a manor house from the last century. I wondered whose personality it was that chose this vulgar style. As he passed through the iron gate, Tony Stark rolled down his car window and said only one sentence into the intercom, "It's me." Henry saw what it meant to pass through with facial recognition, and the big iron gate in front of the courtyard opened directly. The flashy red Ferrari was revved again and rushed into the courtyard. Honestly, Henry thought a sports car was something that didn't consider comfort. He'd rather ride in that second-hand Cadillac he bought in Alaska than in this thing. But at the moment, Henry didn't have time to think about whether his butt would bump into anyone or not. His mind was completely filled with the nervousness of meeting his idol, and he couldn't think of anything else. Even after getting out of the car, Henry immediately used his other hand besides the bouquet to smooth out the wrinkles on his cheap suit. "Coming!" A clear female voice came from behind the main door of the villa, which made Henry's heart rise to his throat and his heart beat so fast that he didn't know how many times faster. As soon as the door opened, Henry lowered his head and handed the bouquet out, saying, "Hello, Ms. Hepburn, I'm a big fan of yours." "Oh, really?" The female voice was different from what I had imagined. It was sharper and cleaner, somewhat different from the slightly low and gentle voice I had imagined. Henry looked up after the celebrity took the flowers. Unexpectedly, he saw the face of a beautiful woman in her twilight years, with deep features and sharp eyes. "Oh, it's Ms. Hepburn." The frustration in his voice was all too evident. Katharine Hepburn immediately shot him a glare and said in a serious tone, "You can make your disappointed expression a little more exaggerated, and I promise not to break your nose." Henry realized it later and quickly made amends, saying, "Oh, Ms. Hepburn, please forgive my disrespect. I am also a fan of yours, there is nothing wrong with that. Whether it's Morning Glory, for which you won the Oscar for Best Actress, or the two masterpieces, Bringing Up Baby and The New Bitch, they are all my favorites. Even subsequent works like The African Queen, Summer's Despair, and Dinner Are You Coming are all very memorable and leave a lasting impression. Your performance in these films proves that you are not only beautiful, but also an excellent actor with excellent acting skills." Katharine peeked out from behind the bouquet at the son of an acquaintance standing behind Henry and said, "Little Tony, tell me what's going on with this friend of yours who talks so fast." "Katharine, this guy is just a little Hollywood actor." The voice clearly showed disbelief. "Some cleverness." His voice rose slightly. If a Stark man could praise someone for being clever, then that person must be incredibly smart. Do you remember the big shooting a while ago? He was the one who fought off those killers with me. Catherine raised her eyebrows and looked at the strange young man again. Henry touched his chest and nodded, saying, "Henry Brown, it's an honor to meet you, Miss Hepburn. Call me Catherine, kid. Otherwise, it's easy to remind you of another Miss Hepburn," the aging star teased. Then he added, "Come in, Tony, this is your home." "No." Tony Stark said, "This is the house the old man bought. It has nothing to do with me." "Humph, a man from the Stark family." Catherine gave up her position at the door and said sarcastically. Henry was not so pretentious. Instead, he went into the house and blocked the door that would close automatically on behalf of Catherine. The fading star gave up his position blocking the door and said, "If little Tony doesn't want to come in, let him stand outside as punishment. Kid, come with me." "Coming." Henry followed happily, leaving the arrogant young master behind. "Damn it, Catherine, you and I are friends. Have you ever seen a friend whose duties include coaxing children?" Catherine Hepburn mercilessly used her final blow and beat the eldest son of the Stark family like a grandson. Tony opened the half-closed door himself, walked in and continued, "Even the chef for today was called by me. You can call them back. This will give me a chance to show off my skills." Catherine didn't indulge the child and continued to poke with the knife. Henry praised from the side, "I have some experience in cooking, I can help out." "Oh. That's great. It seems we now know who the most useless person is among us." Chapter 82, Big Talk. In the end, no one cooked, and the meal was handed over to a professional team of French chefs. And since it is called a banquet, the participants certainly cannot be just Henry, Tony, and Miss Catherine. Another couple is a big shot from the financial circle, Alex Hart, CEO of MasterCard, and his wife. Perhaps because of the presence of Henry, an outsider, Alex, a financial tycoon, did not dominate the conversation at the banquet. Instead, he fulfilled his duty as a listener and gave appropriate responses. Tony Stark, who always loves to be the center of attention, was badly defeated by Henry this time because Henry could name all of Catherine's movies like the back of his hand, and even had positive reviews from the time. Even Henry himself can analyze the strengths and weaknesses of these movies. If someone who is not familiar with movies hears this, they will definitely be confused. But who was Katharine Hepburn? She wasn't the kind of person who would just act in a movie and then not go to see it herself. Coming from a theatre background, and as one of the few actresses in the golden age who was willing to hone her acting skills rather than relying solely on her true self, Catherine could understand what Henry said. This undoubtedly made the aging star feel like she had met a soulmate. Catherine exclaimed, "So you said you were a fan of me, not just another Hepburn. It seems you weren't lying." "Ma'am." Henry was about to speak when he was interrupted. "Call me Catherine." The big star smiled kindly. "Well, Catherine. I wouldn't lie to a beautiful lady like you, who is full of talent. If I were to say something casual or lie, you would be able to tell easily." Tony Stark, unable to bear it any longer, finally cursed in a low voice, "Flatterer." Everyone heard it, but no one took it seriously. They all smiled and continued chatting, obviously knowing Tony Stark's personality well. Catherine further said, "In that case, Henry, let me test you. Please say. Recently, film critics have been criticizing me for still making movies after I turned 40. As a result, I can only rely on sentimentality to maintain a half-dead box office. What do you think of this? Take what these people say as bullshit, Catherine. There are many reasons for the poor box office performance, but I think Hollywood studios bear the greatest responsibility." "Oh, that's new. Finally, I've heard an answer other than criticizing the audience for not being competent enough." Henry commented scathingly, "Because in Hollywood movies, the types and age ranges of women are quite narrow. They're either beautiful young girls, voluptuous and mature women, or mean old women. There are so many different types of women out there. Yet, movie studios use box office as an excuse to restrict their films to just a few. They don't just talk about it, they act. Then they force actresses to play such roles, regardless of whether they are suitable. When they fail or the performance is not ideal, the blame is placed on the actresses. Of course, this isn't your fault. Actors are just one part of the film industry. Even if you've given us your youthful beauty and superb acting skills, you can still be turned into a piece of shit by the camera. Or else, the director, editor, and producer can easily ruin a film. But do any of them admit their mistakes? No. The actors are the perfect scapegoats. If there's a suitable script, a capable director, a producer who isn't overconfident to the point of superstition, and an actor like you, we can create another classic film. No matter what, the success of a film is the result of achieving perfection in all aspects. Similarly, failure can also be caused by many factors. In my opinion, the actors are the ones who are least responsible. Because actors need to be cast before they can appear on screen, and then, under the director's guidance, their acting skills are displayed in front of the camera. If an actor's performance is really bad, shouldn't the fault be placed on the team that cast them? There are so many actors in Hollywood, are they the only ones like this to choose from? If the actor performs well but the movie fails, is there any need to point out where the problem lies? It won't be the actor anyway. Besides, what's wrong with selling nostalgia? Would the audience prefer to watch a new actor whose age and appearance are suitable for the role, but whose acting is actually awkward, instead of choosing a mature actor with good acting skills and rich experience? It sounded like a positive comment, but Catherine disagreed. Instead, she said, although I agree with most of what you said, there was a sense in your words that I was an old woman and should play the role of an old woman. That was even more infuriating. Now it was Henry's turn to say awkwardly, actually, this is not the point I wanted to emphasize. Tony laughed and said, yes, Catherine, you're welcome. This guy just relies on his cleverness to talk down to others. He should be taught a lesson. At this moment, everyone looked at Tony Stark with a puzzled expression. Katharine Hepburn even said, little Tony, why don't you listen to what you just said? Why do you think this problem only occurs in others? Tony wanted to refute Katharine Hepburn's heart-piercing words, but seeing the old lady's expression, he gave up. This person always finds the exact spot to stab someone in their words. Even the most brilliant mind can't guarantee that their words are flawless, a fact proven by 2 generations of Stark. So Tony looked at the boss, who was quiet and seemed a little bored, and said, Alex, let's go to the study and talk. There is my father's collection of whiskey there. It's Howard's collection, I have to try it. If I expect him to take it out himself, I don't know how long I'll have to wait. The financial tycoon followed Tony, leaving his wife to chat with Henry and Catherine about the movie. Henry understood what the 2 women meant when they deliberately kept him here with the topic of movies. They were probably looking for a chance to talk privately, so he shouldn't be so tactless as to ask for a sip of whiskey. In fact, Alex Hart and his wife were invited by Tony through Catherine. This big boss, who usually works in New York, came to California for vacation, which gave Tony an opportunity. He agreed to attend the dinner, not because they had a close personal relationship. If they really wanted to talk about friendship, perhaps if Howard came forward, they could still establish some relationship. Tony Stark's nephew had a motive for inviting him to dinner. Alex Hart was curious about what that motive was, which was why he attended this private dinner. Chapter 83. Secret Meeting in the Study. Howard Stark's study is completely different from the studies of ordinary wealthy people. It wasn't a cabinet full of hardcover and antique books that might not be read in years, purely decorative displays. Instead, it was a cabinet full of periodicals, bound manuscripts, or typed books, some standing upright, some stacked. Every book, or book-like thing, here looked as if it had been read countless times, with various labels sticking out from the top or sides, and some of them were stacked together at specific pages. Alex Hart noticed that the books in the study were in a state of disarray, suggesting the owner hadn't been here for a long time. Although someone cleaned regularly, some fine dust was still visible. After Tony closed the door, he poured 2 glasses of whiskey into wide-mouthed glasses from the wine cabinet, one for himself and one for the invited guests. Alex Hart took the cup, took a sip, and said, it's worthy of being Howard's collection. It's really delicious. Tony Stark took a sip as well. Although it didn't taste the same as the ones he'd sneaked in to drink when he was underage, after trying the cheap drinks at the bar outside, he could still tell the value of this bottle of wine. Tony. Can I call you Tony? Alex Hart said. Yes, you can. Well, Tony, you specially invited me through Catherine. You're not here to drink up all of Howard's collection, are you? There had already been enough polite conversation in the living room, so the financial tycoon got straight to the point after entering the study. Tony Stark was obviously impatient to continue talking about useless things and asked, "You know the murder case that happened a while ago, the case I was involved in?" "Oh, that one, I noticed. I heard a lot of Silicon Valley's, well, what do you call it, upstarts, were also involved in this. But it seems to have been dropped in the end. I haven't heard any subsequent news reports." "Yes, that's right. What if I say that all the FBI agents who were there that day were fake, and that the gunman I left behind that day, including the body, disappeared in the end? Do you think this is normal?" Alex was silent for a moment, then asked, "Did you go and track it down?" "Because I'm involved in this, it's normal for me to want to know what happens next." "You didn't ask Howard." "I'm an adult now and don't need a nominal father to take care of me." With a soft sigh, Alex said, "Okay, go ahead." Tony Stark continued, "I have asked the LAPD, and they insisted that the case and all the evidence were handed over to the FBI. But the FBI Los Angeles branch insisted that they did not take over the case and did not even have relevant records. I even asked people who attended the party that day, but no one talked about the incident, as if nothing had happened. So I started to investigate the matter. But the difficulty and resistance are greater than I imagined. The main reason is that I don't have good means to force those who know the inside story to tell me what I want to know." Then I thought about what happened that day. One of the gunmen said he wanted to give everyone a warning. That's why they chose to act in such a public place. They also knew there were many people they couldn't afford to touch. So I think, instead of trying to figure out who's behind this, I should find someone who understands the warnings and ask them directly what's going on." "Right. So that's why you came to me?" Alex said with a wry smile, "I still say the same thing. Ask Howard. That's the right thing to do." "I don't want to, so." Tony Stark pointed at the person in front of him, and his meaning was very clear. Alex harped down the whiskey in his glass in one gulp, then refilled it for himself, saying, "You are also qualified to know, so it's not taboo for me to tell you. But once I leave this room today, I won't admit to saying anything. If you intend to implicate me, I will simply say that this is just a delusion born of a genius. I hope everyone won't go that far." Tony Stark pretended to zip up his mouth and said, "I just want to know what's going on behind this." Alex moistened his throat and said, "There's an island off the coast of California where some wealthy people have secret fun. Because those activities may not comply with state laws, everyone tacitly keeps silent." "You mean like the Red Couch in Hollywood?" "Maybe even wilder," Alex said, but at the same time denied, "Don't think I've ever been to the island and seen the world. You know, although they will extend the invitation, the choice of whether to go or not is still in your hands." Tony Stark was puzzled and asked, "No matter how wild it is, there are still different ways to play it. But if there is no island, will these capable people stop playing it?" "Don't think that silver fun is the only theme on the island, Tony. In fact, the island also offers many special medical services that you won't find in regular medical institutions." This reminder gave Tony Stark a lot of insight. Often, what hinders medical development and achievement isn't technical issues, but ethical ones. Realizing this, Tony developed an inexplicable aversion to this so-called island. Alex, of course, noticed the change in the young man's expression and admonished him, "Don't think this kind of thing is a bad thing. Existence is justified. Just like profanity, it's impossible to truly ban it. If one day, you or someone close to you needs it, you'll be thankful the island exists." So what does this have to do with the warning? Giving up on investigating the underlying issues, Tony Stark directly asked about the part that was most relevant to him. Alex said, "Since those services are unaffordable for ordinary people, why let so many irrelevant people know about them? Do you think those poor people who can barely support themselves can afford such huge expenses that they may not be able to earn in their entire lives? If these poor people knew about this, there would be only two things they would do. One is to demand the same service for free, the other is to deny it to anyone. You don't think this is a good thing? As the old saying goes, they never ask what they have done for their country, but only what their country has given them." "So, the dead man was a big mouth?" Tony asked. "That's right. He let too many unscreened people know about this. The host didn't want things to get out of control without him seeing them. So they wanted to silence them and warn others at the same time." Chapter 84, Height Determines Vision. "Who's the host?" Tony Stark asked. Alex said honestly, "At my level, I have no way of knowing their identities. But there are two people who are vying to be the external facade. Who? A little fellow named Epstein, and a Nico named Puff Daddy. Eh? Nico? Tony was shocked. Ah, yes. Things in this world are so incredible. A Nico who has used dirty tricks to control a lot of Hollywood resources thinks that he can be on equal footing with us. I remember that guy was a rising rapper. He's got brains, but no self-awareness. Tony asked, so, the killer is one of these two people? No, 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 the killer's relationship with the island is just simple employment. Including those people you guessed to be fake FBI, I think they are from the Aftermath team. Which assassin organization is so powerful? The CIA. Maybe the CIA has a secret operation, I don't know. But I suspect that there's only one organization on the West Coast capable of using a fake FBI identity to conceal the truth. Which one? The Continental. Have you ever heard of that name, Tony? No, I haven't. How can I find them? Why bother looking for them, Tony? They're just tools. Even if you go and ask for an account, as long as you can pay the price, the people who offended you will be gone the next day, but the entire organization will still be there. You can't eliminate them unless you just want to vent your anger. Is there no one taking care of these things? Tony said angrily. Alex, however, drank his wine and spoke the truth, that's also part of America. Just like the earth we live on, there's no way to keep only the daytime part and let the nighttime part disappear forever. Tony Stark remained silent for a moment. After finishing his whiskey, he asked, there's one more thing I want to know. Ask. But I can't guarantee an answer. Is Howard, my father, involved in these businesses? I don't know if you are worried about him having a stake, or if you're surprised he doesn't have a stake in such a big business. I won't ask you which you're feeling. But I can say the answer to this question is no. You sure? Let me put it this way, Tony. These businesses have been around for a long time. Howard is a genius, and he's used his genius to gain the support of the military. But he's not qualified to get involved in these businesses. After Alex finished speaking, he continued, I hope this answer doesn't offend you, but this is the truth. Howard is a smart man and has accumulated considerable wealth, but it's not enough to be on par with those people. Perhaps after you take over, and another 3 or 5 generations develop, you can maintain the current prosperous situation of Stark Industries, or even do better. By then, you won't have to sign up. The Stark family will naturally enter the level of that group. Who are they? Tony asked again. Alex raised his glass and replied, whether you've heard of these names or not, the Red Shoes, the White Shirts, the Freemasons, the Illuminati, the Skull and Bones Society at Yale, Old Money, Blue Blood Aristocracy, or Hydra, etc. Some survive today, some are lost in history, and some are simply hidden. But they are all just a small group within a larger group, a gathering of a small number of people. The great group had no name, no rallies, no oaths, and so on. When you reach that height, your eyes will naturally see those sights. That's disgusting. They don't think anyone should be proud to join them, Tony criticized. Of course, not everyone is interested in such behavior. So they can only hide under the surface and cannot become a formal force or organization. This is the only thing to be thankful for. Alex followed Tony's words. The two wanted to continue talking when the servant of the villa knocked on the door and said, Master Tony, dinner is ready. Alex finished his drink and said, I've pretty much told you everything I know. If you want to know anything else, you'll have to find the answer yourself. I don't know anything more. Okay. I specially hired the chef for today's French meal. I hope his cooking skills won't disappoint us. Let's go and try it. Henry and the others had already taken their seats at the table. Since they were 2 men, no one stood up to greet them before they sat down. When Katharine Hepburn saw Tony coming back, she immediately laughed happily and said, Little Tony, where did you meet this friend? He doesn't look like someone the Starks would know. The words that concealed a knife behind a smile made Tony Stark not know how to respond. Henry smiled and said, How should I put it? Perhaps our initial meeting wasn't very friendly. Katharine, do you want to hear that? Oh, that's not friendly. It's more worth listening to this way, isn't it? Although Katharine was answering, her eyes were looking at the bewildered Tony Stark. Being teased, Tony could only point at Henry and said, You, don't say anything. Then he turned to the servants in the villa and said, And you, hurry up and serve the food. Haha, I'm becoming more and more interested in knowing things that can embarrass the men of the Stark family. Catherine smiled happily. Tony Stark said stubbornly, those things weren't interesting at all, and I was the one protecting him. Otherwise, he would have been finished long ago. Oh, little Henry, is that really the case? Catherine looked at the other party and asked. Henry spread his hands and said, that's right, just as Mr. Stark said. It's a taboo to talk too much with someone you're not close to. If you're not close enough and you're constantly trying to undermine someone, you'll only create an enemy. Henry didn't want to offend this person. Little did he know, his attitude only made Tony Stark's rage rise. Fortunately, before the young master could find any words to refute, the waiter from the chef team had already served the apéritif, indicating that the meal had officially begun. Tony drank the apéritif in one gulp, then shook the glass and asked someone to pour it again. The cold wine calmed him down a bit. Then he said, I know you're still trying to say that if we don't do anything, those gunmen will eventually leave. But before that, who knows about this kind of thing? Okay, I roughly understand. But what about the gunman? Little Tony, do you want to explain it to me? Catherine asked with a forced smile. Oh, damn. Tony Stockton felt like a thorn in his side after he had let the cat out of the bag. He had two versions of his explanation to the outside world. To his own people, he always said he was just passing through and looking for a place to hide, but he never told anyone that he had confronted the killer head-on. To the outside world, he claimed to have killed countless people, but everyone assumed it was just bragging. Who knew it was the truth? Chapter 85 Questions and Answers at the Table. There is no taboo against talking while eating in Western cuisine, or rather, the slow pace of serving food is designed to allow people to enjoy the food more, as well as to chat and bond during the meal. Under the pressure of Katharine Hepburn, Tony Stark reluctantly told the story of his acquaintance with Henry. Katharine, who had just finished eating a spear of asparagus, said, so, the first time you two met, little Tony and that guy were really humiliated by Henry. No, I didn't. It's that person who is embarrassed, it has nothing to do with me. Tony Stark tried to defend himself. What about Henry? Can you really solve such a complicated problem in an instant? In response to the question, Henry smiled and said, of course not. Even the smartest mathematicians need tools to calculate the answer. How could I possibly know it just by looking at it? Then you are. As long as someone is full of confidence and speaks nonsense with a straight face, those who lack self-confidence will involuntarily believe their nonsense. That's why so many people love to watch movies. Otherwise, there would be so many illogical plots or shots that violate physical phenomena. Well, that sounds like a filmmaker. If you don't believe your film will be a hit, how are you going to convince the film companies and the audience to buy tickets to the theater? Tony, finally finding a chance to interrupt, retorted, but that's not scientific at all. In fact, even now, he was doubting Henry's original answer. Was it really just a random guess? It was clearly the same answer as his. Catherine criticized, Tony, we're talking about the movie channel, not the Discovery Channel. If everything had to be scientific, George Lucas's Star Wars would be doomed. Tony muttered, it's not scientific anyway. So when we met for the second time, little Tony was really so rude. He ate as soon as he saw food on the table. No matter what others said, Catherine could always jump out of her original perspective and comment on something with a clear eye. Tony Stark protested, I sponsored that chef team out of my own pocket, and I paid for the ingredients as well. Why can't I eat dishes made with that food? Nodding in agreement without hesitation, Henry also said, yes, yes, of course. But at least you have to show your identity and let people know that the boss is here. Otherwise, who would know if the person stealing other people's food is a homeless person or someone else? After refuting his argument, Henry turned to Catherine and asked, are all Stark men like this? No matter where they go, they assume everyone knows them. This symptom of excessive self-confidence seems incurable. Yes, this is already a terminal illness, and it's a family hereditary disease. I sincerely hope that their next generation will see improvement. Catherine said along the way. Then he asked, by the way, Henry, I know about your third meeting with Tony. You followed him around and shot him. What happened before that? Why did you show up in such a wet and messy state? Just because Tony hadn't asked the question didn't mean he didn't want to know. So when Catherine asked, he remained silent, wanting to hear what Henry had to say. Henry briefly described how he and Justin met again, and then the fat boy threw his cell phone into the swimming pool and asked someone to pick it up. After listening, Tony was the first to speak. This is why you don't want to save people. Because that fat guy offended you first. Henry explained, I have to say, I didn't know the target of the shooters until I finally realized that Josh Hilton was the fat guy. Before that, the person was a person and the name was a name. I didn't connect the two. If I give you a second chance, will you save someone? Tony asked. I still can't. Henry said with a rare serious expression, let's not talk about the bodyguard work for the banquet company. Just dealing with drunks or high guys. Dealing with those with guns is not my job. Besides, I've already quit. I'm just an unarmed passerby at the party. My priority is protecting myself, not cleaning up the mess for those rich guys. But you still helped little Tony, didn't you? Catherine said. Tony Stark said dissatisfiedly, I'm protecting him. If it weren't for the fact that he'd have an extra gun, and he wasn't like a novice who just emptied his gun, I wouldn't have brought him along if he hadn't had one more person to mentally intimidate those gunmen. Yes, that's it. Henry said sarcastically. Unfortunately, the American didn't understand this tone, and Henry didn't want to explain anything, so he let Tony brag about how brave he was. Henry was just seriously struggling with the asparagus on the plate, which was the main course of the day, and then he made some casual comments to help Tony brag about his own performance. Considering that Katharine Hepburn was already 84 years old, the dishes Tony ordered were the best combination after discussion between the chef and nutritionist. There are meat dishes, but the portions are smaller and stewed until they are soft enough to suit the taste of the elderly. Alex Hart and his wife are at the age where they pursue healthy eating, so they certainly have no complaints about this meal. The two young men, however, were equally relishing their meal. Henry's table manners were even better than Tony's, a wealthy young man. He even chatted with the waiter in French, praising the food. All these made the elders feel more favorable towards this young man. Catherine looked at him with a kind and gentle gaze and asked, Little Henry, what are your plans for the future? You're a small-time actor in Hollywood now, according to little Tony. Is he planning to use his connections in Hollywood to repay Tony's favor? It seems that Katharine Hepburn took good care of this guy who was almost like her own child. But Henry didn't accept the favor. He shook his head and said, I came to Hollywood to see the world. Even though I've only been here for less than 6 months, I think I'll change my career sooner or later. Don't you want to be a big star? Catherine asked with a smile. It's not so much that I don't want to be a big star, but rather that I don't want to pay the price of being a big star. I would rather live a more free life. Henry didn't say the line. Although Katharine Hepburn was still in the Hollywood circle and had a certain influence, she was not a golden thigh when it came to promoting someone. Besides, the favor Tony owed her wasn't so bad that Catherine had to go to great lengths to repay it. If it were simply an opportunity, Henry wouldn't want to gamble his Hollywood future on it. Chapter 86 Unexpected Job Opportunity. After hearing Henry's answer, Catherine sighed and said, What a pity. When I was young, I loved performing, so I was blinded by this hobby and didn't see what kind of place Hollywood is. By the time I could see clearly, I was already trapped in the vortex and couldn't escape. If I had the chance to do it again, I would probably just stay in that theater. Henry said regretfully, If that happens, the world will lose a big star named Katharine Hepburn. I don't want to continue in the film industry simply because I don't think I have the hope of becoming a big star, nor do I feel suitable for it. How could that be? You performed very well. There was a hint of cunning in Catherine's eyes. Haha, you can see that. Henry didn't deny it, but he didn't admit anything either. In that case. Catherine took a sip of wine, thought for a moment, and asked, Can you drive? Henry nodded and replied, Yes. Catherine turned around and asked, Little Tony, what do you think of Henry's performance? What performance? Tony was puzzled. That's how he behaved in the gunfight. Tony Stark said with disdain, Not bad, at least it won't hold anyone back. He then asked, Why do you want to know this, Catherine? Catherine said, You know, I and another Ms. Hepburn made a double quotation mark gesture with her hand beside her cheek, are also friends. Not long ago, the driver who had been serving her retired. Since becoming a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador in '88, she has been visiting various places. She will soon be visiting Somalia in Africa. I heard the local situation is a bit unstable, so I was thinking about helping this friend find a reliable driver and bodyguard who can travel around the world with her. Henry's eyes lit up when he heard this. He nodded repeatedly and pointed at himself. All he needed was a dog's tail, wagging like a helicopter propeller, to carry him into the sky. Catherine didn't mind Henry's self-recommendation, but she still said, I just want to know if you have any reasons that would make me feel it's reliable to recommend you as Audrey's driver. Henry could understand Catherine's concerns. Anyway, today was the first time Henry and Catherine met. Because they had a slight liking for each other, he introduced her to his friend. If something went wrong, not to mention the question of who would be held responsible, Catherine would probably feel guilty for the rest of her life. When rich people like them want to hire someone, they will conduct a background check, examine 3 generations of the family, and conduct a loyalty test. They will only hire the person if they pass all of these tests. If it were just a simple employment interview, the most suitable bodyguard and driver in the United States could be found among veterans. Did Henry have any more valuable qualities, or more powerful guarantees, that Catherine could recommend to her friend? So when Catherine said these words, she was actually looking at Tony, wondering if Tony Stark's evaluation of Henry was enough for her to make such a recommendation. But Henry didn't want to gamble on whether his friendship with Tony was good enough to guarantee it. Because in fact, it was not, and Henry knew it very well. Being invited to today's private banquet was simply a matter of some kind of madness on the part of this young master. Perhaps he was just trying to use Ms. Hepburn as bait to make someone laugh. I don't know if today's show satisfied the young master. But if he wants him to guarantee for him, Henry thinks it's better to give himself a little bargaining chip. Although this goes against my original intention of living a dull life, being able to see Audrey Hepburn in person, it seems that revealing a little bit of my abilities is not unacceptable. I thought this would be a difficult choice. But Henry made the decision without even thinking. He said, Tony, my friend, do you have a gun? A pistol would be fine. Lend me one. Walter. What do you need a gun for? You don't look like someone who believes that suicide will lead to hell, so if you want to go there, you'll have to find another way. Tony counterattacked with a gentle, neither hard nor soft blow. Henry immediately turned to the other side and asked, Mr. Hart, I know this request is a bit presumptuous, but I promise I'm not trying to hurt anyone. I just want to prove a little thing. Seeing is worse than telling, so do you have a gun? Alex Hart looked thoughtful and said, maybe my driver might have it. Should we go and get him in now? Trouble. After a while, a big white man in a black suit came to the restaurant under the guidance of the villa servant. Henry said to the man, Sir, do you have a gun? I'd like to borrow it from you. Mr. Hart. The big white man looked at his employer. He didn't dare to hand over a gun to someone he didn't know, especially when he didn't have any other weapons. Although Alex Hart wanted to see if the result was as he suspected, when the time came, he hesitated. Is it a good thing to let a stranger have a weapon? Henry probably guessed what these people were worried about, so he changed his tone and said, How about this, sir, you don't need to give me the gun. Please just shoot me in the palm of my hand. Anyway, if I ask you to shoot somewhere else, you probably won't dare. The white man had never seen such a situation before, where someone would actually ask others to shoot him. So he still looked at his employer hesitantly, hoping to get clear instructions. As if to reassure the other party, Henry continued, Go ahead and shoot. I will definitely not hold you responsible or hold you accountable for any compensation afterwards. At the same time, Henry extended his right hand to the side, away from his body, and said, You can stand closer and shoot, so it won't be difficult to hit from too far away. This time, Alex Hart didn't have too many concerns and nodded to his personal bodyguard. The white man then pulled out a Beretta 9.2F pistol from the holster under his arm and aimed it at Henry's outstretched hand. He didn't dare get too close, and even before firing, he double-checked. Sir, are you sure you want me to shoot you in the palm of your hand? Yes, I'm sure, Henry replied. No regrets. Why should I regret it? Anyway, you should just shoot, don't be like Pussy. Bang. The shot surprised everyone present. But Henry's palm only slightly dented and retreated a little. He then showed his palm to everyone at the table. There was no damage at all, let alone a hole. Look everyone, I'm fine. Henry said proudly. Chapter 87 A Genius Like a Fool. Wow. Catherine was the first to exclaim in admiration. Little Henry, you're not afraid of bullets. Is that true? Well, I'd say it hurts, but it won't penetrate. Henry lied a little here. It was impossible for it to hurt. Even the slight concavity of his palm and the repulsive movement were just a performance. Henry didn't want to appear too evil in the eyes of others. Wait a minute! Tony Stark shouted, stopping the others from speaking. He lowered his head and thought seriously. Let me think about it first, he said. Anything to think about? Henry asked puzzled. So, during the gunfight earlier, you were like walking behind me in an airtight bulletproof vest. And I foolishly thought you needed to be taken care of, so I stood in front of you and protected you from a lot of danger. Is that what you mean? Henry spread his hands and said with a face that asked for a beating, Mr. Tony Stark, I thought I advised you not to get involved in a gunfight, just find a place to hide. As for what happened afterwards, why can't you understand that I was helping you block a possible bullet from behind? Even though being attacked from behind has never happened before. Tony stood up and said with increasing agitation, so, I'm like a naked guy with a gun shooting at a bunch of hitmen. And then you can just walk up to them and beat them up one by one. That's the idea. Henry answered seriously, that's impossible. If a normal person sees an opponent who's immune to their weapons and is walking towards them, they'll know to get out of the way. A certain Kryptonian avoided the question of beating someone up. So. Tony Stark pounded the table excitedly and said, what I risked my life for is like entering a paintball field to play a survival game for you. Well, sir, if that's the analogy you want to use, it's not wrong. I just think you could think about the problem more calmly. How do you expect me to stay calm? You never told me this kind of thing. If you had told me, I would definitely have other solutions. Instead of rushing up like a fool and shooting at others stupidly. Tony was about to explode. This kind of thing, Henry widened his eyes and said in disbelief, who would talk about it all the time, afraid that others wouldn't know. Do you expect me to introduce myself to you as follows? Hi, how are you? I'm Henry Brown, an alien from Krypton. I can fly, shoot sparks from my eyes, blow windstorms from my mouth, and am invulnerable to swords, guns, water, and fire. If I say that, 90% of people will think I'm crazy, and the rest will think I'm joking. Because how can I prove those things? Didn't you prove it today? Tony said excitedly. That's because of the interview. I have to provide evidence to prove that I'm qualified for the job of driver and bodyguard, so I do this. Otherwise, am I going to shoot myself in front of every new friend I meet? Only a psychopath would do that. But you can say it. Whether you believe it or not is other people's problem. Oh, then, Mr. Stark, you would tell everyone, hello, I'm Tony Stark. My father is Howard Stark, and Stark Industries is my family's business. I'm currently studying at Caltech, and I'm a genius. Wait. Tony interrupted Henry and said, I started studying electrical engineering at MIT at the age of 14 and eventually earned a PhD in engineering physics. I'm on vacation at Caltech, and I'm also working on my PhD in aerospace engineering. You're right about being a genius, but I'm not your average Caltech student. Yes, yes. Henry said, his eyes drooping and his hands raised to the sky, then will you brag about these things to everyone you meet? Are you afraid that others don't know, so you tell them every time you see them? Of course I wouldn't do anything like a peacock showing off its feathers. And I want to emphasize that although my last name is Stark, I haven't asked my family for money since I was 12. Including tuition, I have relied on the income from my patents to pay for everything. Yet. Why do you think I have to talk about something you wouldn't do every day? Master Stark. Perhaps it was because Henry's tone was too rude, but Tony's anger was immediately redirected. He emphasized himself again, I already said it, call me Tony. I have no other relationship with the other Mr. Stark except blood. Haha. Henry looked around the big room, Tony's clothes worth at least 5 figures, and the French meal on the table where dessert had already begun, and couldn't help but say. Your genius doesn't think that only accepting money from your parents counts as money from your family. Aside from inheriting Stark Industries, everything else is self-made. Did you earn everything here on your own? Tony paused, his voice weakening as he continued, having a roof over your head, clothes to wear, and food to eat, isn't that normal? If I were to refuse even these, wouldn't that be too hypocritical of me? Haha, yet. Henry said no more. If he continued, it would sound like he was criticizing him. Wait a minute. You've pissed me off. Are those things you just said true? Those aliens and stuff? Tony seemed to wake up and brought the subject back to Henry. Henry slapped his forehead and said, "Oh, God, Tony, can't you tell the truth from lies? If I say that I can break the boundaries of dimensions with one punch and can travel across the world by running, would you believe it or not?" Tony, of course, didn't believe Henry's bizarre description. But he had personally verified that his body could block the bullet. He thought for a moment and said, "So, you actually had a chance to save Josh Hilton?" "Right. No, I don't stand a chance. I will never admit that I can save him even if I'm beaten to death. Besides, I just don't want to save him, so what? How is that possible? You're not afraid of bullets. You could have taken a bullet for that fat guy. You wouldn't just ignore an innocent person getting shot because of a personal grudge." Henry said, "Whether the fat man is innocent or not, I am not a judge and I have no way of knowing for sure. And if I want to save him, I have to run over first." Then, before the gunman opened fire, I stood in front of that fat guy who was bigger than me. Do you think the last group of gunmen who appeared would be distracted by my actions, giving me a chance to save people? Considering the flower bed where they were hiding and the crowd controlled by the gunman, it would have been impossible to save anyone unless one had super speed. But Tony said dissatisfiedly, "But you didn't even try. To waste one's energy on something one knows is impossible is what a saint does. I'm just an ordinary person with special abilities." Chapter 88 Father's debt is paid by son. But your ability allows you to help more people. Tony continued to emphasize. Henry didn't waste too much time on this kind of moral debate. Instead, he asked directly, "Tony, your family is very rich, right?" "Well, even if we don't talk about your family, you are also very rich, right?" Although he was a little unhappy, Tony Stark did not deny it and said, "That's right. It's not a sin to be rich." "Of course not. Then I say, take out your family's money and give each poor person 10,000. Then we can realize the great vision of an America without poor people, wouldn't that be great?" Tony was surprised and said, "That's not how wealth redistribution works. Do you need me to recommend some economics books? Besides, my family and I are rich, so what does that have to do with those poor people? Yet, your family's wealth is their business, and they certainly have no obligation to share it with the poor. But just because I'm bulletproof, does that mean I should take bullets for everyone in the world? If someone gets shot in the future, will it be my fault because I didn't take the bullet?" Tony was not defeated by such specious arguments, but said, "Stark Industries is carrying out charity projects, so it's not that we don't help the poor, but we don't use that crude method of distributing money. By the same token, I also think it's unfair that all the people shot around the world should be blamed on you. But you didn't help where you could see it. You're wasting the talent God gave you." He is indeed worthy of being a hero in the future, Henry sighed in his heart. With Tony Stark being known as the world's richest man in the future, he had many ways to help people, but in the end he chose to do it himself. What a rare and precious sentiment. Henry, who aspires to live a simple life, doesn't find such things ridiculous. But that doesn't mean he has to imitate the other person's behavior and hold the same moral standards. So Henry said seriously, "I think that not using this talent to do evil is the greatest kindness I can do to the world. While I don't mind helping others, I'm not selflessly offering my help to everyone. Ultimately, I have neither the obligation nor the incentive to do so. How about this, an annual salary of 1 million, you work for me and listen to my instructions." The wealthy Tony finally showed off his financial ability. Henry smiled sweetly, then said decisively, "No." "Why? Isn't that the same as wanting to be Audrey Hepburn's driver and bodyguard? Or maybe you think the money isn't enough?" Tisk 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 tisk. Henry shook his index finger and said, "Although I don't know what you plan to do when hiring me, I guess it's probably just a daily bodyguard, a human shield. Or else, I'd just be like a vigilante, stirring up trouble everywhere." "Oh, no, I should say I'd help others for free, as long as it satisfied my vanity. You are willing to pay me for this instead of asking me to do it for free, which is a noble act. But helping you and helping Ms. Hepburn, no matter which one I help, can be of the same nature." "Of course it's the same," Tony protested. Henry analyzed seriously, "I'm employed by Tony Stark, with an annual salary of millions. But I don't know how much I'll have to spend on seeing a psychiatrist to heal the psychological trauma I suffered while being commanded. Employed by Ms. Hepburn, well, I don't know what the going rate for a full-time driver is. But whether it's $30,000 or $50,000 a year, I'm open to it. The most important thing is serving the two Ms. Hepburns. The joy I feel is priceless. Catherine, who had been watching the show, said happily, "Oh, that's very nice to hear. Come here, good boy, and I'll give you a bite of pudding." Henry obediently put his mouth close to hers, and Catherine fed her grandson like a kind old grandmother. One was happily fed, the other ate with relish. Their acting skills were so strong and exaggerated that it made people around them feel sick of it. Henry, with an intoxicated look on his face, said, as expected, "The pudding fed by Catherine herself tastes different. It's really delicious." Tony, who was the first to be affected, of course shouted in dissatisfaction, "Our puddings are all the same." The same. At the same time, he put the pudding plate in front of him directly on his mouth and swallowed the dessert carefully prepared by the chef in one gulp. Henry shook his head and said, "Tisk, tisk, 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 how can I put it? Surely scientists don't understand the romance of artists. Even if the chemical composition and physical properties are exactly the same, how can they feel the same if they are fed in different ways? It seems like if Mr. Tony wanted to give someone a gift, he'd probably ask them to buy it themselves, wish themselves a happy birthday, and then take the receipt to Stark Industries for reimbursement. He wouldn't care what the purchase was. In fact, this was a Kryptonian who first said what Master Tony would do in the future, but it unexpectedly made Catherine burst out laughing, and then she laughed endlessly. Seeing Catherine's non-stop laughter, everyone was puzzled at first, but then suddenly realized something. Henry even said, "Could it be that old Mr. Stark has done something like this before?" Tony Stark looked embarrassed, but Catherine nodded repeatedly and said, "I almost thought you had heard some rumors, so you teased little Tony with such words. If anyone says that the Stark father and son in this world are not relatives, we will be angry with him." Little Stark was just unaware of his father's romantic affairs. But seeing how sullen he looked, and how unsure he was about how to refute, it was clear that the claim that those romantic affairs hadn't affected little Stark was a lie. Just thinking about how Tony met Catherine, given the age difference of more than 60 years between them, it couldn't be love at first sight in a bar. However, in this kind of situation, Henry can only provide assists and cannot be the main attacker to avoid attracting hatred. Besides, Catherine's magic defense is maxed out, and the future Iron Man won't even dare to touch her. As the main attacker and tank, she is invincible. Not to mention Catherine's strong desire to attack, rushing towards Tony at every opportunity, as if to return all the losses she suffered from the old Stark to the young Stark. This is definitely a case of the son paying for his father's debt. As a man who lives a life of fun, Henry regrets not having a camera with him to record this historic moment. Otherwise, today's joke would have made the other person laugh until he was in his grave. But Catherine is very sensible and she won't really embarrass Tony. Just from her ability to read people's expressions, it's clear that her decades in Hollywood haven't been wasted. Everyone here is a shrewd person, only the future Iron Man is a novice. Chapter 89 Seeing Off Guests. After the dinner, there was no second or third meeting or other entertainment programs like other banquets. Alex Hart and his wife left first. Before leaving, he not only gave Henry a personal business card but also Henry's contact number. His eyes were intriguing. Catherine came to Los Angeles this time to stay in the Stark family's villa, so she had no plans to move. But she also exchanged contact information with Henry and said, "I will contact Audrey about your work. However, we don't live in Los Angeles, so we have to arrange a time to meet. So be patient, kid. If you want to see the star you admire, another Hepburn. And the decision is hers, you know." "I understand, Catherine." Henry just thanked him and didn't say much. "Because if I talk too much, this Miss Hepburn in front of me will get jealous. Even a Kryptonian can't stand the jealousy of an octogenarian." When Henry walked out of the door, he was surprised to find that the flashy red Ferrari was still there. Tony was standing by the car smoking. When he saw someone coming out, he stamped out the remaining cigarette butt and said, "Get in the car, I'll take you home." "Oh, I thought I had to walk home by myself," Henry joked. Tony said unhappily, "I brought you here, so it's only natural to send you back. And I don't want you to walk around this wealthy area all night. You won't run into any robbers, but you'll run into some nosy cops. So get on board, and if you wait until I kick your ass, you'll be in the front car. This swanky Ferrari has a mid-engine, so the trunk is at the front. It's not very spacious, at least in Henry's X-ray vision. If he wants to fit it in, he'll have to break his arms or legs into several pieces. Of course Henry didn't want to stay in the trunk, so he got in the car obediently. As Tony stepped on the accelerator, Henry squeezed into the seat. The roar of the engine seemed to be venting Tony's emotions, and in an instant, the speed reached the red line. Even though it was a sports car that emphasized grip, Tony managed to pull off a drift. The large iron gate had slowly opened earlier, leaving just enough space for a car to pass through as the Ferrari passed through. Clearly, every moment was calculated. It has to be admitted that Tony Stark does have a remarkable talent for vehicle control, which is why he was able to drive a Formula One car in a formal race on the Monte Carlo circuit in Morocco in the movie. Although the car's style is not the top F1 level, it should be only F2 level. But a racing driver's license is not that easy to get, and not everyone can drive in an official competition. However, once on the official road, Tony did not start racing, but instead adhered to the speed limit. The Ferrari's engine speed entered a stable range, neither high speed close to idle nor high speed close to the engine limit. Looking at the situation, Henry knew that Tony had something to say, otherwise he would have sent him away in a hurry. Tony was neither used to nor happy with the rejection. He then asked again, "Why didn't you accept my job offer?" "You're bringing this up again?" Henry asked, "What else do you think I can do besides take bullets?" Tony was speechless for a moment, then said after a moment, "Actually, shouldn't mutants like you find ways to use your talents to better integrate into the lives of ordinary people? So you think of yourself as a mutant?" Henry, however, didn't want to clear up the misunderstanding and asked, "Then our genius Mr. Tony, can you tell me what kind of people the top lawyers in the United States serve? What kind of people can afford to hire these elite lawyers?" This question made Tony silent again. Henry continued, "If someone wants to hire me as a gunman, they must have done something that would make them want to shoot them. I think 9 out of 10 people like that are bad people. As for the remaining one, I don't think he can afford to hire me. So, is it really a good thing for me to make this kind of money against my conscience? If you say you're a vigilante, saving people everywhere, don't you think that by the time I get there, the person might already be dead? And then the police come up and arrest me as a suspect. I must be so desperate to do such a thankless job. So volunteering to be Ms. Hepburn's driver and bodyguard is the best solution I can think of. At least she's a good person, and I can be of use in places like Africa. More importantly, she can at least pay me a basic salary. Unlike other poor people, I won't have to work for nothing." Tony now understood that Henry's attitude wasn't that he wasn't willing to help others, nor was it that he was wasting his talent. He was just picking the people he helped, and he did it in a way that made it impossible to find fault with them. Henry continued, "If I'm disappointing you by rejecting your job offer today, I'm sorry. But I have to be clear, I didn't really mean to reject you. You can see that, Mr. Tony, the genius." "That's fine, Tony." "Mr. Tony, what a sarcastic remark." After complaining indifferently, Tony added, "Are you trying to reject Alex?" Henry said, "Of course. Didn't you see that financial tycoon's eyes light up when he saw I could take a bullet? It's just that this is our first meeting, so some things are hard to say. We've met a few times, and with Ms. Hepburn making jokes beside me, I can treat my rejection of you as a joke without being too rude. This is the best outcome for me. I don't even want to think about why a big boss like him would need someone like me." Tony thought back to what Alex had said. He knew so much, could it really be that, as he said, it had nothing to do with him? "If you're worried about him, you could have offered more ordinary conditions instead of revealing your abilities," Tony criticized. Henry sneered, "If I just act like an ordinary person, with your power, would it be difficult to find someone more capable and trustworthy than me? Do I really have any other bargaining chips? Oh, sorry, I forgot. After all, the young master of the Stark family lives a simple life. I can't understand how difficult it would be for a small person like me to cross the class and enter your circle, even if it's just as a servant. If I don't show some abilities that I don't have, how can you look up to a stranger like me? I'm not naive enough to think that we can be considered friends just because we've talked a few times, especially if they weren't all pleasant experiences. If we were really friends, I believe you could have answered more directly when Katharine Hepburn asked me for my opinion just now. And you wouldn't have used Ms. Hepburn as bait to lure me in and see me make a fool of myself. But I'm not offended by this. Regardless of whether you were satisfied with today's monkey show, I did my best. All of this is to repay you for giving me this opportunity. I'm truly grateful for this, and I don't mean any disrespect. After all, not everyone gets an opportunity like this. I'm not being sarcastic or trying to be sarcastic. And I believe that our life paths won't overlap that much in the future. I'm not the son of a billionaire, and our circles won't be the same. The car stopped at the roadside when they arrived at their destination. Henry opened the door and got out. He stood beside the car, waved his hands and bowed in a Western-style manner, gave a standard business smile, and said, "So, goodbye, never see you again. Mr. Tony Stark." Tony Stark's silence is the best response. Chapter 90 Airport Pickup. When Henry came to the Stark family villa again, he drove a third-generation Cadillac DeVille, a 65 model classic car. He stood by the passenger seat, holding a red rose, and welcomed Ms. Katharine Hepburn into the car. The 84-year-old grandmother was dressed in a violet dress, a wide-brimmed silk sun hat, and long white gloves. Her style was retro, yet she exuded elegance. Henry presented her with flowers and praised her. "Katharine, you look so beautiful today. You have such a sweet mouth. But I only have one flower today," Katharine said jokingly when she saw the bouquet of flowers on the back seat. "One beautiful red rose is enough." Henry then opened the passenger door and made a please gesture. Katharine tapped Henry's head with a red rose and said, "Your mind is really quick. I almost doubt if I were 60 years younger, I would have fallen for your words. It would be a great honor." After getting on the passenger seat, Katharine tapped the leather cushion above the storage box and said, "Drive faster. Today is the day for you, a fan, to meet the big star. You don't want to miss the airport pickup time and leave our big star waiting in vain. Don't worry, the plane arrives at 10 in the morning, right? We still have plenty of time. Katharine, have you had breakfast?" "I've eaten. The old people's meal times can't be as irregular as you young people's." Henry drove and chatted all the way until they arrived at Los Angeles International Airport. After parking the car and going to the departure hall of the airport, Katharine and Henry played a game of guessing who the paparazzi was while waiting for them. After all, this is the airport closest to Hollywood, and there are often tabloid media and paparazzi waiting to see which celebrities will arrive. Katharine's arrival didn't attract the attention of these young reporters and paparazzi. Their targets were still those celebrities who were popular or had a lot of buzz. Naturally, they didn't notice that they had gone from being the observer to being the observed. Not long after, an elderly beauty wearing an ivory t-shirt with red dots, a peach pleated skirt, a white silk headscarf, and large sunglasses walked out of the exit hall. She was carrying two large, modern-looking LV handbags, one large and one small, and wearing a pair of pale pink low-heeled shoes. Her outstanding elegance attracted the attention of most people at the airport. Just as the young people were unable to recognize Katharine at first glance, no one recognized who this thin and beautiful woman in her old age was. Only Katharine came forward and gave her a big hug. "Audrey, long time no see. Katharine, you still look good." The other Ms. Hepburn also responded with a warm hug and exchanged greetings with her friend who was much older than her. Henry, who seemed to be frightened, finally woke up from his dream after being pushed by Katharine. He handed over the flowers in his hand and greeted warmly, "Ms. Hepburn, welcome. I am a big fan of yours." "It is really." Henry, unable to utter a complete sentence, was in tears and was so excited that he didn't know how to describe his feelings. It has to be said that even when Henry saw Tony Stark, he felt that he was just seeing a little kid. He didn't feel like he was seeing a future hero, a great man. But Audrey Hepburn's blooming period has passed, and she is getting old. Even though her skin has lost its radiance and her scarf and sunglasses cannot hide the wrinkles on her face, the excitement she feels is unimaginable to those who have never been seriously obsessed with a star. Perhaps the 20 years of blankness and torture after he traveled to this world made Henry, who had been immersed in movie channels in Alaska for more than a month, more dependent on this memory than he imagined. Because the memories before the time travel were too distant and too chaotic. The beauties of Hollywood's golden age were like the light of dawn, truly breaking through the haze that had originally brought this world. So this feeling, in addition to meeting the star I admire, is more of a feeling of being saved. Being rescued by old John in Alaska was a physical redemption, but being able to see Audrey Hepburn in person was like a spiritual redemption. "Thank you, these flowers are really beautiful." Audrey Hepburn took the flowers and said, "You must be Mr. Brown." "Yes, Henry Brown. You can just call me Henry." Henry, who finally managed to speak a complete sentence, answered excitedly. Perhaps Henry's attitude was too passionate. Catherine was afraid that he might scare her, so she tried to lighten the mood by jokingly saying, "Audrey, do you know what he said when he first saw me?" "Oh, did I also say I'm a big fan of yours?" "No," he said, "oh, it's this Miss Hepburn." He looked so disappointed that I almost needed to fix his nose. Audrey was stunned for a moment, then chuckled and said, "Did he really say that?" "Yeah, can you imagine his expression?" "I think I can." Audrey smiled and said, "Remember Givenchy? Hubert de Givenchy. When I first visited him, he mistook me for another Miss Hepburn and was disappointed. Then, we are even." Catherine said. Audrey hooked her arm around Catherine's and said with a smile, "Is there any such thing as even-handedness?" The public conversation between the two good friends regardless of age difference also attracted the attention of others. Perhaps the meeting of two old women is not a big deal, but if one is called Catherine and the other is called Audrey, also known as Miss Hepburn, it is also a topic of discussion. Both of them were big stars who were used to dealing with media reporters, so they are quite sensitive to the movements of paparazzi. Catherine was the first to speak, "Let's go get in the car first. You must be a little tired after flying all the way from Switzerland." "Fortunately, I got a good rest on the plane. It's just the jet lag. I can't adapt to it that quickly." Catherine said to Henry, who was standing stupidly by the side, "Kid, help your star with his luggage. You don't even have this much self-awareness. I really doubt you can do your job well." "Ah, yes." Henry quickly took Audrey's handbag and said, "Ma'am, please let me serve you." "Thank you for your help, handsome boy." The two old sisters, with their arms linked together, chatted about their lives during this period as if they had endless things to say. Henry dropped the two of them off at the waiting area and then drove to the parking lot. He also knew that the interview for the role of Audrey Hepburn's driver had already begun, but he didn't know whether the first impression he made on the other party was good or bad. Chapter 91 Job Offer. "Robert didn't follow you?" Catherine asked. Since her divorce from André Diddy in '82, Robert Wolders, a Dutch actor who was 7 years younger than Audrey, has become her certified life partner. However, the two of them did not get married, but instead lived in a relationship more than just friends. Audrey Hepburn would bring her young boyfriend to many public events, and the two even met with then-US President Reagan together. In contrast, Catherine has been single since her divorce 34 years ago and has no children. But this doesn't mean she doesn't care about her friend's love lives, so she asked. Audrey said helplessly, "Robert isn't very interested in charity events in Africa, so he doesn't really want to go this time. I don't want to force him." "Humph, men. They're very enthusiastic when going to a bar or restaurant, but asking for their company is like asking for their life." Catherine fired a map cannon. Henry, sitting in the driver's seat, said helplessly to the two people in the back seat, "Hello, ladies, I'm driving very well. I don't deserve to be criticized like this. I'm injured." "Ha, good boy, drive carefully. And then no matter what you hear, ignore it yourself. Will that make you feel better?" Catherine's sharp words continued to make Henry very depressed. Audrey came to the rescue and said, "Henry, how long have you been driving? You drive very smoothly." Henry said honestly, "I've had my driver's license for about 6 months. Before that, I was only in Alaska, a no-man's land. I'm considered a natural driver." All three sentences are true, but many situations are not mentioned. However, it is enough for others to imagine. Moreover, the quality of a driver's driving skills can only be determined by actual experience, and driving experience is only used as a reference. Both Audrey and Catherine have experienced the experience of experienced drivers with poor driving skills. Some people, like those who don't know how to use the accelerator, can't maintain a constant speed, they press and release it intermittently, causing the car's speed to fluctuate like a wave. Even driving in a straight line can make people feel carsick. Catherine assisted from the side and said, "Little Henry's driving skills are pretty good. At least he drove this old car without shaking it so much that an old woman like me vomited my breakfast." Henry acted innocent and said, Catherine, I asked you if you wanted me to rent a car. Ha, don't worry, kid, no one will mind your old car. The third-generation DeVille, model year 65, was considered a large luxury car by Cadillac. While not as luxurious as top-tier luxury cars like Bentley and Rolls-Royce, it was still a prestigious car for some Hollywood stars. These two aging beauties have seen all sorts of things. At this age, they've reached a point where they're not jealous or demanding. Of course, they don't mind the car they ride, safety and comfort are more important. Moreover, since Henry knew that he would be driving this Cadillac to pick up these two distinguished guests, he cleaned the interior thoroughly, almost to the point of being completely refurbished. Especially the smell, gaps, and other places that are difficult for ordinary people to notice, the Kryptonians have repaired them according to their own standards. They are just short of dismantling the entire car and doing detailed maintenance. As for the car's performance, the previous owner of the Cadillac had done a pretty good job, and he had no bad habits in daily driving, so the car had no major problems. This was also a major reason why Henry agreed to take over. In other words, the only thing I can fault with this car is that the paint on the body is not shiny enough. Although it has been waxed, it still doesn't look like new. But for two aging celebrities who consider themselves past their prime, this flaw is just the right thing to do. At their age, they don't want to relive the memories of playing hide-and-seek with paparazzi. Oh, by the way. Audrey pulled out a business card from her handbag and handed it forward, asking, Henry, do you know this address? Henry took the business card and glanced at it. Ronnie Insurance Managers. Although insurance managers also sell insurance, this profession does not stand on the side of the insurance company, but on the side of the policyholder to create a suitable insurance plan for them. Managers may work with multiple insurance companies and will not only promote the products of a particular insurance company. Because managers stand on the policyholder's side, they also provide some additional services to enable policyholders to meet the prerequisites for a certain insurance product in order to achieve maximum security and reduce premiums. Audrey Hepburn's description is indeed in line with this common sense. She said, Ronnie told me that if I want to buy insurance for this trip to Somalia, Africa, I have to bring a security team that meets the requirements. Ronnie helped me contact a security team this time. One of the purposes of coming to Los Angeles is to meet with this team. If it's a good fit, we'll sign a contract. The security team. Henry's voice was a little lost. The two elderly beauties were both very attentive and had perfected their ability to read people's expressions. They understood the young man's tone without Henry saying anything. Audrey chuckled and said, Don't worry, Henry. From the moment I saw you, this job belongs to you. Unless you don't want it. Henry beamed excitedly, how could I possibly refuse such an opportunity? It would be the honor of my life to serve Ms. Hepburn. His attitude reveals his true nature as a dog licker. Even the amount he didn't lick before crossing over, he licked enough in this lifetime. But to say that Henry was unaware of this was not entirely true. He simply sang in his mind various rhymes along the lines of young people don't know how good ants are, but only after they have tasted it do they realize how sweet soft rice is. Audrey was not happy about Henry's immediate agreement. Instead, she said seriously, but this job is not easy, little Henry. I'm looking for a personal assistant rather than a driver. The most important thing about this job is that I travel around the world with you, even though most of the time I'll be in Europe. Anton, who originally followed me, has been working for me since I was still filming in Hollywood. But after I became the UN Goodwill Ambassador for Children in '88, visiting and attending charity events all over the world, he became overwhelmed and chose to retire. That's why I needed a new assistant. I have to make it clear to you that this isn't just a simple driving job. It's not that difficult, but it's very complicated. Most importantly, you have to accompany an old woman like me everywhere. Are you willing to do that? Of course, ma'am. I have some talent in languages and may be of great help. Henry repeated this short sentence in French, Dutch and German. Chapter 92 New Job Confirmed. I'm really surprised. Audrey expressed her surprise without hesitation. She then turned to her older sister beside her and said, Catherine, you said you would give me a surprise. Could this be it? Catherine was born and raised in the United States, so besides English, she only knows a little French, and she doesn't speak it very fluently. In contrast, Audrey was born in Belgium to a British family of Dutch nobility and could speak several major European languages like a native speaker. The three languages used by Henry are also the official languages of Belgium. Catherine hadn't expected Henry to do this, but it didn't surprise her much. Tony's venom was still as sharp as ever at Henry, but the fact that he'd never once called him a fool spoke volumes. So Catherine shook her head and said, "That's not the surprise I was talking about. I recommended this kid to be your driver because of his talent." "Talent?" Audrey looked curiously at the young man driving through the rearview mirror. Catherine continued, "Little Henry is not afraid of bullets." "Not afraid of bullets?" Audrey was stunned for a moment and asked, "Is it the kind of bulletproof I think it is?" "It's probably what you think it is, bulletproof." Catherine even gestured with her finger to her head, as if firing a gun. Then, looking at her right hand, which had been shaped like a gun, she shook her head in disdain. Audrey Hepburn was really surprised this time. People with special talents are not rare in this world. And for unknown reasons, this world is quite tolerant of mutants with special talents. So Audrey Hepburn did not feel disgusted or uncomfortable because the other person had special talents. She was simply curious, so she asked, "Henry, if you have such talent, I think you can find a better job. I can't afford that kind of salary." "Yes, ladies," Henry said helplessly, "but think about it carefully. What kind of person would be willing to pay a lot of money to hire me to take a bullet? Good guys? I'm afraid most of them are bad guys." Audrey and Catherine figured this out at the same time. Their age had already proven they weren't the naive, childlike types who'd been raised in a greenhouse. They'd seen the dark side of society, but they weren't completely ignorant either. Henry said directly and frankly, "I don't think about how much money I can make with this talent, and it doesn't matter if I can't use it. Being able to work for Ms. Hepburn is what I value. As for compensation, just think of me as an ordinary driver or assistant. I'm even willing to pay for this job. So, ma'am, how much do you think I should pay for the opportunity to serve you?" "Oh, Henry, are you serious? That's so sweet." Audrey asked, holding her heart. Of course, the opportunity to serve beautiful ladies isn't something everyone gets. On the contrary, there are people everywhere who do so many bad things that people want to shoot them. If I want to make money like that, I have to sacrifice my conscience first. Yes, Audrey, take this good child with you. Your health is worse than mine, 20 years older than you, and you like to run around everywhere. Without someone suitable to take good care of you, how much time do you think we can spend together?" Catherine made an assist at the right time, so that Audrey Hepburn did not have the opportunity to worry like Tony Stark did before, wondering why Henry, who had such talent, did not help more people. Besides, traveling all over the place did have some impact on Audrey's health. She let go of the elderly man who had always been by her side. Besides the fact that Anton himself was unable to handle such a job, Audrey also felt that Anton was not up to the task. Therefore, she needed new blood to join the team to better help her carry out charity activities. Finally, Audrey Hepburn gave in. She said, "Well, Henry, you're welcome to join me. For a retired star, I hope you won't mind the salary I can offer you." "Of course not, ma'am. Call me Audrey. Otherwise, you just call me Catherine by my first name, but only call me Ms. Hepburn. It makes me feel jealous." "Is it a woman's innate skill to act coquettishly in a jealous tone?" Henry admitted that he couldn't stand it, and even Kryptonians had to break their defenses. "Okay, Audrey." Henry whispered carefully as he drove, "Actually, I have one little wish." "Oh, please." Henry said, "It would be really great if I could get an autographed photo of you. I've searched all over Hollywood and can't find any of your pictures in any souvenir shops, or even at auction houses." Catherine, still sharp and venomous, said self-deprecatingly, "Who would want a photo of an outdated old woman? So it's normal that you can't find it, isn't it? Isn't it because those who have the autographed photos of the two treasure them so much that they are not available on the market?" "Oh, my God, Catherine, what's wrong with this child?" Audrey pulled her elder sister's arm, patted it and asked. "Well, I have to admit that the person introduced by the Stark man seems to be of the same character as those two father and son. They don't seem very reliable. Otherwise, why don't you choose a new assistant?" "Hello, ladies, I don't talk like that to everyone," Henry said aggrievedly. "It's a familiar smell indeed." The two old sisters looked at the man in the driver's seat with vigilant eyes, as if they were a united front. Then they laughed to themselves. Henry gave an embarrassed look in return and quickly changed the subject, saying, "So, Are we going to the insurance manager now? No, we made an appointment with them in the afternoon. It's almost noon now, maybe we should find a place to have lunch. Do you have any recommendations? I flew all night and only had a cup of coffee and a piece of toast for breakfast. I'm starving now. Audrey said. Well, how about Italian food? Henry suggested. It's a family-style restaurant run by an Italian couple. I can't say if the taste is authentic, because I've never been to Italy. But it's really delicious. Do you have any restaurants you'd like to try? The two sisters exchanged a glance. Audrey said excitedly, No, let's go to this Italian restaurant. Let's evaluate whether their Italian cuisine is authentic. Catherine added, Yeah, I'm tired of people treating me like an old man. They always tell me I can't eat this or that. Henry, who hadn't thought of this for a moment, was embarrassed and wanted to back out. But seeing that the two celebrities were already enthusiastically discussing Italian food, he still sent them to Aunt Caesaria's restaurant. For the elderly, it is more important to maintain a happy mood than to avoid certain foods. Thanks to Lei Yath, the pianist of destiny, Mr. D, where are you? I am Yuan Fang, and book friend 20240813869_EC for their tips. Chapter 93 Insurance Manager Company. Aunt Caesaria's Italian cuisine is so delicious that it can conquer 2 big stars. Audrey happily spoke to him in Italian, not only about cooking but also about everything else. Henry acted as an interpreter, relaying what she said to Catherine, who didn't understand Italian, and occasionally helped her interrupt. In the end, even without Henry translating, Catherine seemed to be able to intervene in the Italian communication between Salia and Audrey, laughing when she should laugh and making expressions when she should make them. According to Henry's observations, in addition to the tacit understanding between women, the most important thing is the body movements used when speaking Italian, which are actually easier to learn than the language itself. After watching it so many times, Catherine figured out the tricks behind it and learned it without any teacher. The fixed program after the meal is, of course, taking a photo with the boss and the big star. This was the era when instant cameras were popular, and most celebrities would not refuse to have their photos taken with them. Because these cameras had no negative film, it was very difficult to alter or manipulate the photos later. If a photo is not properly stored and is destroyed, it will be gone forever and cannot be recovered. This uniqueness makes Polaroid photos even more precious. So the two Audrey Hepburns took photos with the boss and his wife, leaving a message at the same time. This kind of Polaroid romance is something that young people in the future digital camera era will never be able to experience. After the delicious lunch, Henry drove the two ladies to downtown Los Angeles. Ronnie Insurance Managers was located on the upper floors of a commercial building, but not just anyone could walk into the building, press the elevator, and go to any floor. The joint reception desk and security personnel in the first floor lobby diligently keep out anyone unqualified. Anyone not currently in the building who wishes to enter must make an appointment in advance. The arrival of Ms. Catherine and Ms. Audrey Hepburn was not blocked by any little devils, as Mr. Wales Ronnie was waiting in the first floor lobby to greet the distinguished guests who had made appointments for the day. This is an old gentleman who is no younger than Audrey Hepburn. His kind-hearted, plump figure and well-dressed clothes all reveal that he is an old-school elite white-collar worker. The two were old acquaintances, and the first thing they did was give each other a kiss on the cheek. Mr. Ronnie greeted Audrey excitedly with a look that Henry also understood. Miss Hepburn, it's an honor to serve you again. Xiao I came here uninvited. You won't turn me away, will you? Catherine was a step slower, but also gave Mr. Ronnie a kiss on the cheek. Wales Ronnie said, Oh, another Miss Hepburn. I can't welcome you both enough, how can I keep you out? Who is this? The old gentleman noticed the young man following the two big stars. Audrey introduced, This is Henry, my newly hired assistant. Henry promptly took out a bottle of champagne tied with a red ribbon from a paper bag, handed it over and said, Good day, Mr. Ronnie. This is a gift from the two Miss Hepburns. Oh, this is really troublesome. Wales Ronnie took the champagne and put it back into the paper bag, holding it and showing the way to everyone. Come, everyone, please follow me. The security team I want to introduce is already waiting in my office. With Mr. Ronnie leading the way, the security personnel in the lobby on the first floor certainly could not block the way. They diligently pressed the elevator up button for the group and held the elevator door until everyone entered. As an American doing business with high-end clients, no matter how sloppy his private life habits are, he must have a very comfortably decorated storefront to receive guests. Miss Hepburn and the others were welcomed into this reception hall, where 4 sturdy men were already waiting. Audrey Hepburn and Katharine Hepburn may have faded from their glory days, but they haven't left the screen. Even though they're no longer the beauties of their heyday, many still recognize their faces. The white men were of course well aware of their purpose in being here today, and also knew who they might be hired to protect. So the moment Audrey Hepburn showed up, they all stood up to greet her. In fact, even if the employer does not show up, it is gentlemanly etiquette for men to stand up and greet a lady when she enters the room. Wales Ronnie was the first to introduce Audrey. "Ma'am, this is the security team member I want to introduce to you. The person in charge is Brian Mills, and the others are Sam Gilroy, Mark Casey, and Bernie Harris." Audrey shook hands with each person she introduced. They are former Green Berets, Special Forces soldiers of the U.S. Army. They have now set up their own security company, specializing in providing VIP protection services. Although it's a newly established company, I have contacted their military superiors, and each one of them gave excellent evaluations. Not only have they been deployed overseas twice or more, they have all been honorably discharged, with no dishonorable experience. If there's a downside, it's that they don't accept long-term assignments. But this will fit perfectly with your itinerary for this visit to Somalia, Audrey. They will be responsible for your entry and exit security until you return to civilization. Audrey Hepburn asked doubtfully, "I simply accepted the UN's arrangement to visit local child aid facilities, conduct assessments, and take photos to support the fundraising campaign. Is it necessary to make such a big fuss?" Brian Mills, now in his prime, had shed his youthful innocence thanks to his military service. His sharp features, especially his determined, bright eyes, made him an instantly recognizable figure. He stepped forward and said in a low, almost echoing voice, "Ma'am, we too wish the world were peaceful and safe. But the reality is that it's not. The insurance company recommended us simply to ensure your safety, that's all." "Team recommended by the insurance company?" Katharine said from the side, "Xiao Wei, I thought you were the one who found these guys." Wales Ronnie explained, "Katharine, I always ask insurance companies from the perspective of a customer, and then choose the one that is most favorable to the customer from the conditions offered by various insurance companies. Today, Pacific Products not only offers very affordable insurance premiums, but also proactively provides a security team to ensure that everything goes smoothly. This is why these strong young men are here. But I personally investigated their background and reputation. It's not like Pacific Products provided me with some information and I'm just reporting the same to you. So they are indeed trustworthy, I can guarantee that." Chapter 94 Security Team. The United States had just fought the First Persian Gulf War, and with the reunification of East and West Germany and the crumbling Red Empire to the north, American soldiers at this time felt they were invincible and unbeatable. Even if this soldier didn't necessarily participate in that war, using the same equipment would inevitably make others think that I could do the same. And this is probably not an illusion, but the real truth. Even if the soldier retires, the habits he developed in the military will not be quickly eroded by daily life. But Brian and the others didn't have that piercing edge, they were reserved and calm. For 2 big stars who had seen countless people, someone with this kind of temperament already made them trust each other a little more. After all, people who are calm and composed are more trustworthy than those impulsive young men. The latter are much more likely to mess things up than the former. However, Audrey, who had taken her seat, did not hastily trust anyone in the team. She took out a document from her bag, placed it on the table, and pushed it forward. "This is the itinerary set by UNICEF. Could you please share your thoughts on how you can accommodate this itinerary? And if you can, please give me some details." Regardless of which Ms. Hepburn it was, they had all come into contact with the so-called security team, not necessarily the few strong men in front of them. After all, when they were at the peak of their popularity, who didn't have a few bodyguards around? Even during the film promotion period, when they were traveling around the United States, the film crew would always have security personnel following them to avoid unnecessary accidents. So Audrey Hepburn took out the itinerary arranged by UNICEF and gave it to them as a test. "Even if I don't have the relevant knowledge, I've been protected for so long that I've developed a keen eye. I can tell whether the other party is good or bad by listening to their plan. If they are just trying to hold back their farts and just stand there like a static figure beside the person they are protecting, the quality of such a team will not be very good. However, Brian Mills is a very organized person. He looked through the itinerary plan provided by the United Nations and explained how his team members could cooperate and deploy in each itinerary. He would also point out the shortcomings in the original plan and what adjustments needed to be made. Each and every one of them was explained very clearly. At least for the layman present, they would only think that this person seemed very powerful and what he said must be true. Audrey certainly couldn't find any fault with Brian's explanation and correction. She said, "Mr. Mills, could you please organize what you just said into a plan? You should know that if we want to revise the itinerary proposed by UNICEF, we should also come up with a reasonable proposal. We shouldn't arbitrarily change the plan at the last minute and demand others' cooperation." Brian Mills gave a surprisingly shy smile and said, "I guess this means we got the job." "Of course, you're welcome." Audrey stood up and shook hands with Brian. Brian then said, "If we're going to make a plan, can I have a copy of this original itinerary for reference?" "Of course, it's not a confidential document," Audrey replied. Immediately, an assistant from the management company took the document and made a copy. Audrey said, "I'm sorry, we're a bit pressed for time and there aren't many days left before departure. I might have to ask you to move faster." "We understand." Brian nodded. "How can we contact you once our new plan is ready?" "Please hand it over to my new assistant, Henry Brown." Henry did not follow the two stars into their seats, but stood behind them. When Audrey introduced him, he nodded to her. Audrey, who had been thinking about something, turned around and asked, "Henry, do you have a fax machine?" "I only have an answering machine." "If you want a fax machine, just get another phone line." In this era when the internet was just emerging and email boxes were still being hatched in some corner, file transmission relied on fax machines or mail. You can buy this thing at any hardware store, but you have to apply for a separate phone line to avoid competing with the phone line. It's not something you get when you buy it, you have to wait for the phone company to install it. So Audrey turned to her insurance manager and said, "Well, Wales, can I borrow your fax machine?" "Of course, ma'am." "So, Mr. Mills." Brian Mills interrupted and said, "Ma'am, just call me Brian." "Okay, Brian. You can call me Audrey then. If you need to fax any documents, please fax them to Mr. Ronnie. If you need to schedule a time to discuss, please contact Henry." Henry wrote down a phone number and handed it over. "Sorry, I don't have a business card yet," he said. The jump from a passerby actor to a star assistant is a big change in identity, so the things around Henry have not yet changed. Luckily, Brian wasn't a stickler for details. After he hung up the phone, he asked, "How many people will be accompanying the lady? I need to confirm how many people I'm protecting." Audrey replied, "They are UN personnel, accompanied by members of the peacekeeping force, so we don't have to worry. They are mainly responsible for the safety of me, my assistant, and Henry." Although there was no need to worry about the indestructible young man, Audrey didn't choose to go so far as to spread the news. This was also Henry's private instruction. There was really no need to spread such things. Besides, in her opinion, Henry was just indestructible by gunfire. If he was left behind during the operation, it would be a tragedy. But Brian was looking at another big star present. Catherine noticed his gaze, waved her hand and said with a smile, "Please, you don't think that an old woman in her 80s like me would torture myself, do you? The work of going to the Dark Continent should be left to you young people. I came here today just to join in the fun and see what you are like. If you want to protect Audrey, you can't be a weakling on the outside." "So, are we qualified, Ms. Hepburn?" Brian asked. The quick-witted Catherine asked back, "Which Miss Hepburn are you asking about?" As they spoke, the two old sisters with the same surname but no blood relationship started laughing again. Only then did Brian Mills's immature side show through. He blushed and scratched his head in embarrassment. However, his comrades didn't let him go and instead started to fight with him. Luckily, they remembered that this was in front of a lady and on someone else's property, so they didn't go too far. But they also yanked Brian's hair, which had been so carefully combed, into a mess. The two old sisters were even happier now. Chapter 95, African Trip. Don't expect star-rated hotels or central air conditioning in Africa. You'd be happy to have a basic electric fan in your room. Otherwise, you can only endure the harassment of mosquitoes, open the windows wide, and hope for a breeze to blow in. But even if there is a breeze, it will probably be a hot wind that is not very comfortable. Henry's treatment was no different from that of Audrey Hepburn, the protagonist of this charity trip. They both shared a single room. The only difference between him and other members of the visiting group is that his room as an assistant is right next to his employer, making it convenient for communication and handling of matters. However, Henry did not sleep most of the night, not because he could not adapt to the climate in Africa, but simply because he wanted to write the information about his visit. Don't think that for a UN event like this, Audrey Hepburn only needs to go out, find a place, and pose for a few photos. At each location, a record of the visit must be made, with photos taken as supporting evidence. A visit report must be submitted at the end of the activity. In addition to providing information on the local child protection institutions and education in Somalia, the more important purpose of this report is to attract generous donations from participants in fundraising activities. Originally, these records and reports were written by Audrey Hepburn herself. The photos were provided by the record officer accompanying UNICEF. As an assistant, Henry naturally took over this work, wrote the draft, and then Audrey Hepburn revised it. This undoubtedly greatly reduced Ms. Hepburn's workload. Such treatment was something that the old Anton had never had when he was an assistant. The typewriter originally used by Ms. Hepburn is now placed in Henry's room, gathering dust. Yes, Henry didn't use this thing anymore. Or rather, he didn't use it that often. Mainly considering the old man's presbyopia, typewriters are not like future computers that can adjust the font size at will, so Henry simply wrote it by hand. No cursive or flourishes, just regular block letters, a few sizes larger than the typewriter font, so Audrey didn't have to wear reading glasses to read the things she typed. Another reason for writing by hand is that when Henry uses super speed, he can write faster by hand than on a typewriter. After all, the typewriter's mechanical arms take a fixed amount of time to pop out and reset. Kryptonians going full speed would just make the poor machine smoke and the arms fight with each other. Better to just write by hand, just be careful not to puncture the paper. As for the content, it was even simpler. After looking at several samples Audrey had submitted, Henry used the same template and made some minor changes to the content before launching the project. Anyway, this thing is like an official document. If someone uses flashbacks, interpolations, montage, and other descriptive techniques, and then adds some foreshadowing and suspense, who would be driven to death? Official documents should be simple and clear, like eight-legged essays. You'll know the main theme of any paragraph as soon as you see it. Rather than having to guess or speculate, or read through it before you understand what the nonsense is actually saying. This was nothing for Henry, who had gone through exam-oriented education before crossing over. He could make up something without even using his super brain to think deeply. Audrey Hepburn wasn't a poor student, and even after her rise to fame, she actively pursued self-improvement. But compared to young people like Henry, who could secretly use cheating devices, her 60 years still often left her feeling inadequate. So, Ms. Hepburn quickly realized the benefits of Henry becoming her assistant. At least she could get a good night's sleep every night, as long as she could endure this terrible weather. Even for the photos used for the visit, Audrey provided the camera, film, and materials and tools for developing the photos, leaving it to Henry to do the work. So during the trip, in addition to assisting with daily affairs, you can also see the assistant with a camera hanging around his neck running around, taking photos for the activities. Developing photos at night is even easier. Just use a piece of opaque black cloth to separate a space in the room, and there is no need for any red light. Henry can develop photos in the dark. Then, during the next day's free time, I could discuss the report content and the photos I would use with Audrey. This greatly reduced the time and energy Audrey spent on these trivial matters, easing her burden. In short, Henry, who had never done assistant work in his 2 lives, relied on his super brain with extensive knowledge and a good memory, as well as the hard-working spirit cultivated by working 996 in his previous life, to turn himself into a 007 talent. But he didn't feel tired at all. Although the master he followed was no longer as beautiful as before, her bright eyes were more intelligent than before, her voice was also the same as in the movie, just as pleasant and moving. Not to mention her thoughtfulness and words full of wisdom and brilliance. Before today, Henry always thought that the Virgin Mary was just a personality trope, or even a derogatory term with the opposite meaning to its literal meaning. Those who consider themselves saints are actually saintly figures whose logic is inconsistent and they are full of selfishness and calculations. Once their own logic is used to attack their own remarks, they can only curse in frustration. But after actually meeting someone who's dedicated to charity, all my previous stereotypes were completely changed. It turns out there really are people who are selflessly giving. However, it cannot be denied that Audrey Hepburn was already well off, so she had the spare energy to devote herself to these charitable causes. As the old saying goes, when you are poor, you should take care of yourself, when you are rich, you should help the world. Ms. Hepburn has clearly reached the second stage. Compared to this person who genuinely cared about the children, she wept bitterly at the sight of something unbearable, yet smiled heartily at the innocent laughter of the children. The rest of the team was in a state of chaos. It is said that diplomats are like half spies, and there is usually something fishy behind public welfare activities in the name of charity. Henry would not comment on the UN entourage, as they all had their own tasks besides assisting Audrey Hepburn with her visit. Even the security team introduced by the insurance company to the actress who is devoted to charity is not as simple as it seems. The weapons Audrey had reluctantly agreed to carry were incredibly heavy. Light machine guns, grenades, and mines equipment clearly not meant for security caught Henry's eye. However, Henry couldn't explain what he saw with his X-ray eyes, nor did he want to expose the other party. Because Audrey Hepburn's star halo had become a shield for them, if it was exposed, it was not certain who would be hurt. Chapter 96 The Security Team with a Hidden Secret. Henry didn't believe that Brian Mills and his security guards had any intentions towards the outdated actress. He rather believed that these people were using Audrey as a cover to carry out their own mission, just like those diplomats of the United Nations. When it comes to the American agency that is keen on causing trouble abroad, 3 letters pop up in our mind without having to think too much: CIA. In short, the entire Somalia delegation, with the exception of Henry himself and Audrey Hepburn, the innocent figure who served as the leader, all harbored ulterior motives. The chaos was like a parade of demons and a riot of demons. Even on this night when Henry was staying in his room, writing down his visit records, under the surveillance of his supervision and super hearing, except for Audrey Hepburn in the next room who went to bed early, everyone else was busy. Some were contacting the locals, some were using radios to send messages, and some were taking out their weapons for maintenance and inventory. Henry didn't think he was that lucky. Nothing like this had happened at Audrey's previous events. He just happened to run into this excitement. He also believed that every time Audrey Hepburn visited a place, there were similar troubles behind the scenes. However, the troubles never broke out, and there was no trouble for her. Each trip ended peacefully. In fact, from these people's point of view, maintaining the personality and image of the movie queen is also a good thing for them. Otherwise, if this umbrella of protection was leaked and their actions were exposed, it would mean that they would not be able to continue using Audrey Hepburn as a cover to carry out their tasks under the table. So Henry had no intention of disturbing those people. As long as his employer was safe and sound, why not let her live in a fairytale dream world, doing what she loved and wanted to do? But this time, Henry couldn't help his curiosity. It could be said that these people were operating right under his nose, and he would feel sorry for himself if he didn't check. So in his spare time, Henry used his X-ray vision to look through the documents these people brought with them. He even developed the ability to read the documents page by page with his X-ray vision, and he read everything. The mission consisted of contacting various local warlords to plot the overthrow of the current president, Mohammed Syed Barre, and carefully examining the strength of each warlord, including their military strength and level of mechanization. I wonder if this information will be handed over to the current president of Somalia, causing chaos in that African country, or if the CIA intends to use this information to cause further trouble and seek greater benefits. Anyway, the vulture-like United States still has that familiar taste. The world has not become more peaceful because of the existence of superheroes and various extraordinary powers. Conspiracies still exist in corners that ordinary people cannot see. In other words, those people became even more aggressive because of this. Just like the world Henry knew, everything, even medicine and virtual digital products, could be transformed into a sharp blade to pierce the enemy. The more powerful, the more painful the killing. The difference lies in who is the enemy in the eyes of those who hold sharp weapons. Henry didn't interfere in these matters. After all, this was a country of black men, not his. This was a universe with mutants, Captain America and Tony Stark, but it was also not his. During the 20 years of imprisonment, whether those years could be described as blank or tragic, Henry was always careful to avoid those points that might trigger his emotions. Because he knew very well that once some things crossed that line, there was no going back. If he turns evil and uses Kryptonian powers to do whatever he wants, then the end result will be that he will destroy the world or destroy himself. Of course, There could also be a third ending that many readers would love to see, where he becomes so powerful that he controls everything and holds the multiverse in his hands, making anyone he wants live or die. The reason we embark on this path of no return is mainly because there is no anchor in this world, a harbor for our soul to rest in. Or to put it more simply, home. Without a place to stay, it is easy for people to go down a dead end, even if the sky falls and the earth breaks. Even if you want to give up along the way, the cause and effect created by taking the first step will push you forward, no matter whether there is an abyss ahead. This kind of person is the most terrifying to the whole world and to human society because he has no worries. Moreover, what he did would force him to continue doing it, because once he stopped, the cause and effect he had planted before would inevitably come back to him, and he would most likely end up dead. If we say that during his time in Alaska, watching the movie channel on the old TV, those classic black and white movies were a kind of spiritual salvation for Henry. So serving the lady who was sleeping in the next room was no less important to Henry than his life in this world. For the first time, an anchor appeared to fix him down. Henry did not reveal his past to anyone, but some people were able to detect some of the information and react accordingly. Audrey and Katharine Hepburn, the two ladies, treated Henry as their most common name, child. Katharine had no children, but Audrey was the mother who raised two children. Although no one emphasized this, Henry still felt that he was being treated like a child. In particular, the way Audrey Hepburn looked at Henry was not like looking at a man, nor was she looking at a life partner, nor was she simply looking at an assistant hired by her. That look was like looking at his two sons who were no longer with him, looking at this boy who needed care and perhaps protection. Henry certainly had no intention of recognizing his mother, nor did he have any sexual thoughts about a 60-year-old, out-of-date beauty. But he had to admit that it was different to have someone around to care about him. It's as if there is a place in this world that belongs to me, and someone remembers me. Such a mood, of course, would not be allowed to be tarnished by others. For the sake of that lady, Henry even felt that the rules he set for himself could not be broken. He wouldn't go on a killing spree for this, as long as what those people did didn't harm Audrey Hepburn, he would turn a blind eye. Anyway, no matter how messed up the world gets, it's not his fault as a Kryptonian who traveled through time and space. Henry doesn't have the noble sentiment of Superman, who shoulders the entire Earth. Looking out the window, the occasional barking of dogs broke the tranquility of the night. As it was the first time in 2 lifetimes that Henry set foot on the African continent, he did not have any special feelings. The night was still the same. Whether it was the hot wind or the annoying mosquitoes, they were not a big problem for Henry, who had a Kryptonian constitution. Not only was he immune to cold and heat, but mosquitoes also couldn't bite through Kryptonian skin. However, the conspiracy lurking in the darkness will not stop because of the existence of Kryptonians. Henry would just watch coldly unless these conspiracies turned into huge waves and hit him or the lady. Chapter 97 Changes in Visit Plan. Hey, man, want a beer? Henry pressed a styrofoam travel cooler in the trunk and asked Bernie, the oldest member of the security team. The retired sergeant in the green beret looked at his comrade Mark and nodded, saying, "Henry, have a can." As he spoke, Henry pulled out 2 aluminum cans of beer from a cooler filled with ice, tossed them over, and then took a can for himself. The 3 of them opened their cans simultaneously, took a sip, and exhaled simultaneously. The refreshingly cool beer seemed to have magical powers, driving away the heat of the African continent. Not far away, Audrey Hepburn was playing with children taken in by child protection agencies, accompanied by UN personnel and local Somali officials. But the only one who truly treated the children with care was Ms. Hepburn. After taking the photo, the UN and Somali officials stood aside to discuss matters. Henry overheard the conversation, expressing unease about the domestic situation, using his super hearing. Everyone else could only see the worried expressions on the faces of the 2 groups. The only way to make them smile again or treat those children kindly is to put a camera in front of them. It is more effective than anyone shouting at them. Henry had just finished shooting a roll of film and, while returning to his car to change the film, he had a beer with the 2 privately hired security guards guarding the car to beat the heat. He noticed that the local guide and several black men in uniform, who were either soldiers or police, were also looking at him with envy. Henry took out a full bottle of cold beer from the cooler and walked over. In his newly learned Somali, Henry said, "Hey, friend, it's a hot day, how about a gift from a good friend?" "You are so generous, my friend," said the black guys, smiling broadly as they took the beer. Henry, who had brushed up on his Somali before setting off, spoke haltingly to the other party. It can only be said that the language learned from the textbook is not the same as the spoken language of the locals. At the beginning, when Henry spoke to the black brothers in the rigid Somali language from the textbook, he was severely ridiculed. The fact that he can now talk to others properly is the result of his interactions with these black guys. Actually, given Henry's abilities, he wanted to speak like a local, including using that unique tongue-twisting accent just right, so there wouldn't be any major problems. But that learning speed was too scary, so he pretended again. After chatting with a few black men, Henry returned to the car and asked about old Bernie, "Where are Brian and the others?" Hearing Henry's question, old Bernie replied, "I'm preparing for tomorrow's things." Henry couldn't help but complain and said, "Yet. Before we left, we were told not to change our plans, but who knew such a problem would arise as soon as we got here? No one knew the situation in Somalia had become so bad," said old Bernie with a wry smile. "We thought this was just a simple job, just a stroll around and then go home." Henry didn't believe this complaint. If it weren't for the CIA people fanning the flames, this African country would have become so bad. But Henry couldn't say that. He followed old Bernie's lead and said, "They heard we were coming to visit, and it was Somalia that took the initiative to invite us. After we got here, we discovered the social unrest, but there was no report at home. I always feel that President Barr's request is not actually for more UNICEF funding, but for peacekeeping forces to help him maintain order." Old Bernie agreed, "You're right. We've long known how cunning those niggers are. No wonder the farmers used to use whips to teach niggers how to do things instead of having proper discussions with them." Faced with such discriminatory remarks, Henry shrugged his shoulders indifferently and was not likely to blame the other party for anything. After all, this isn't the PC era yet, and the white guys' opinions haven't been completely suppressed. Even if they do, they'll just be suppressed, not gone. In the eyes of a spectator, it is just like putting a lid on the pressure cooker, slowly heating the bottom, and waiting for the moment when the lid can no longer withstand the pressure and pops open. But for now, Henry was content to complain matter-of-factly, the place we were supposed to visit was already in chaos. The Somali officials were insisting on us going there, even saying that Ms. Hepburn didn't have to go, but the peacekeeping force had to go. When I heard this request, I almost laughed out loud. Does that president, who looks down on us, think of us as his soldiers, who can be ordered around at will? Pfft, looking at people through the nostrils, your description is really interesting. That guy didn't actually raise his head that high, it's just that his nostrils are a little big." Old Boney laughed. "Yes, thanks to him, we were able to temporarily change our schedule and split up to conduct the visit," Henry said helplessly. "Actually, I wanted to persuade Ms. Hepburn to give up her upcoming trip and return home early." "No one can persuade that big star, right?" Old Bernie said calmly. "Look, even Brian has quietly accepted the change of plans and is making subsequent arrangements." Henry said darkly, "You know, that's how movies always work. Once a team is separated for various reasons, one of the teams will always be unlucky, or even wiped out. Otherwise, there will be no movie effect at all." "Ha, Hollywood people!" Old Bernie laughed and said, "You said it was a movie effect. But it's not always like that in reality. Otherwise, in a war, which commander would dare to split his troops into two to attack? Besides, the place we're going to tomorrow was chosen from the alternative locations in the original itinerary. Brian already had a plan, he just needs to adjust the deployment and confirm the implementation of the new location. With us here, you don't have to worry about your safety." Henry muttered a few words, like an ordinary young man who was afraid of death. Ms. Hepburn waved to Henry from a distance, and the assistant immediately understood and picked up a box of candies and biscuits from the trunk. Henry said to the person next to him, "The lady is calling me, I'll go over first." "Go ahead, kid. I'll take care of your ass." Old Bernie said something with a hint of disagreement, and then he and his old comrades around him burst into laughter. Henry didn't dislike these veterans hiding their CIA identities. He suspected they wouldn't be able to stay there for long. Intelligence was a stinking cesspool, unsuitable for the soldier's character. But he didn't forget to fight back. "Then it would be best if you use your mouth to stop someone with a big baby rushing towards my ass. That way you don't have to worry about your own ass." "Wow! Good job, kid." Mark, who had been silent all this time, exclaimed. Chapter 98 New Places to Visit. "I really can't believe that this is all true. Henry said as he sat on a small jet airliner, looking out the window at the blue sky and white clouds outside. Although this rented small passenger plane is not a luxurious jet like the Gulfstream, its comfort is incomparable to that of traditional propeller aircraft. Brian sat comfortably in his seat and said, "You should be thankful that the airport we're going to has a qualified concrete runway. Otherwise, we'd have to take a traditional propeller plane, and the turbulence alone would make you feel like you're on a roller coaster." Henry looked speechlessly at Brian Mills, the head of the security team, and said, "Do you think I'm a kid who screams with excitement when I get on a plane? I find it incredible that UNICEF personnel are acting like puppets of the current president of Somalia, Mohammed Syed Barre. They said the itinerary couldn't be changed, and so it stayed that way. I went there obediently. I went with the same peacekeeping squad. To me, the symbolic significance of this was greater than their actual combat capability. Of course, I'm not saying the peacekeeping forces are useless. It's just that they're too few in number. If trouble really hits, they won't be of much use. At best, they can help the UN personnel escape. And the president seems to be hoping we'll come down like a celestial being and wipe out the unrest in Somalia for him. He might as well be holding up a Quran and preaching it everywhere." What Henry didn't say was, maybe the reason Somalia is in such chaos is because this team visiting the children's facility has become the biggest troublemaker. There were 8 people on the plane: Audrey Hepburn, Henry, the assistant, 4 members of the security team I'd met at the insurance agency, and a female flight attendant. The captain was in the cockpit. Because the team was so lean, Brian had rented a small passenger jet, the United Nations covering the cost. A rental car had already been arranged at the destination airport, and local officials and guides were waiting. After a while, Henry asked again, "I just can't understand, who decided where we were going?" Watching the young man act like a coward and afraid of death, Audrey almost believed that he was really that scared, if she really didn't know that the young man was naturally bulletproof. Audrey didn't expose the other person, but patiently explained, it was a joint decision. We all agreed that southern Somalia, where we were going, was the farthest from the unrest in the north. This nonsensical reason almost made Henry laugh. But on second thought, he felt that it was not surprising that those who had the decision-making power made such a choice. Strictly speaking, the world hasn't yet experienced the Arab Spring. They simply believe that if the source of the unrest is contained and prevented from growing, the problem can be solved. And they believe that the American military is invincible. The problem is that when the entire Somali society is filled with the same atmosphere, unrest in one place is likely to cause a response in a large number of places, causing the same unrest to break out in other places. So the requirement of being farthest from the site of unrest wasn't a guarantee of safety. But no one realized this, and they were even too foolish to believe it, simply trusting that American soldiers were truly invincible. Henry's character has no decision-making power, not even the right to make suggestions. He can only advise Ms. Audrey Hepburn privately, or just mutter a few words. But as long as the lady disagrees, Henry, the employee, can only act according to his employer's wishes unless there is other evidence. Soon, the plane began to descend, passing through a patch of white clouds, and the scenery outside the window changed back to the African savanna. This area is an extension of the Kenyan savanna, so looking down from the plane, you can see large groups of wild animals living on the land. Henry's supervision allows him to see that this is a group of zebras. He couldn't help but sigh, "Is there a place like this that we would want to visit?" Brian explained, "Our target is a small settlement about half a day's drive from the airport. There's a child protection agency supported by UNICEF here." Old Bernie added, "The name of the program is to provide care for local children who have nowhere to turn to, but in reality, no one knows how the funds are actually used." The content was somewhat cynical, so Brian rolled his eyes. Ms. Hepburn did not like to hear such remarks. So old Bernie added, "But this child protection agency is quite decent," so it was included in the scheduled list for visits and eventually became a backup location. As everyone chatted, the small passenger plane landed smoothly. The veteran Italian captain demonstrated excellent flying skills, causing no discomfort to the passengers. Because it is a small airport, although there are managers, it is open to the elements. From time to time, animals are seen crossing the airport runway. The apron was right in front of the hangar, requiring the pilot to maneuver the aircraft there. After communicating with the tower, the Italian captain parked the aircraft where it was supposed to be. 2 unattended Range Rovers were already parked nearby. Brian and his 3 companions were the first to disembark, forming a semicircle in front of the cabin door, keeping a vigilant eye on the surroundings. Henry followed suit, but didn't stay away. Instead, he supported Ms. Hepburn, who disembarked later. Henry saw a Range Rover very close to the side and asked, "Is this our means of transportation?" Sam and Mark went forward to check a car respectively, and Brian said, "I did some research beforehand. Where we are going, there is a lack of even the kind of decent roads we had before. Most of the way there is, we have to go on the grassland. For driving in places like this, an SUV would be the best choice. But the comfort is like being chewed by a dog, there's no point in being particular. If you want both comfort and performance, these SUVs are the best choice. Sport Utility Vehicle, or SUV for short. The Jeep Cherokee and Land Rover Range Rover are considered the ancestors. In Africa, expecting to find the latest SUVs like the Ford Explorer was simply too much to ask for. Brian was already a master of his craft by getting 2 Land Rovers, he couldn't ask for more. Henry guessed that this might be the CIA's resources behind it. However, this was taking advantage of others, so of course there was no need to point it out. Brian also asked Audrey, "Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you with riding this car for the next 2 days. I won't feel wronged. I've ridden in off-road vehicles before, and compared to them, the Land Rover is much more approachable." Chapter 99 New Arrangements. Henry moved a chair so Audrey could sit in the shade under the hangar. He said, "Boss, we need to load the supplies from the plane into the car. It will take a while, so please rest here for a while." Audrey complained, "I've been on the plane for a while. Now that I've finally landed, you're asking me to sit down again. Go get busy, kid. I'll walk around and stretch my body. I'll sit down naturally when I'm tired." "Okay, boss. But don't run where we can't see you." Henry compromised. Several grown men rolled up their sleeves and prepared to move the supplies brought by the plane onto 2 vehicles. Unlike large passenger planes, which have dedicated cargo holds, small passenger planes do have dedicated luggage compartments for storing larger items. However, this time they brought quite a lot of stuff, so some of it was secured to the floor with additional straps. Brian directed, "Henry, go move those boxes." "Okay." Besides Henry, who had been kind enough to help, old Bernie also helped carry the boxes of supplies. These contained the collected aid, destined for shelters. They were primarily clothes and food, along with some less practical stuffed toys. There are also some supplies prepared for themselves, including water, dry food, sleeping bags, etc. Brian and the other 2 carried larger wooden crates or smaller iron boxes. These were logistical supplies for the security team, including firearms and ammunition. For safety reasons, Brian and his team handled these things personally and did not let Henry touch them. However, they usually only carry pistols concealed and do not carry long guns, mainly because they do not want to scare children. In Africa, firearms are no strangers to ordinary people. Even children who end up in child protection agencies may be the survivors of family members who were shot. In order not to stimulate the sensitive emotions of these children, Ms. Hepburn asked not to carry a long gun in front of them before leaving. After loading all the supplies into the car, Henry watched the Italian captain park the plane under the hangar. The airport manager came over to take a look, collected the fee, and then went off to handle the follow-up matters. Henry and his group, having prepared everything, did not leave the airport. Instead, they stayed on the apron, waiting for local officials and guides to lead the way. Otherwise, even if a group of people knew where their destination was, they could just rush over. The local conservation agency might not recognize a group of white people, and if a dispute arose, it would be bad. So Henry took advantage of this time to ask about the next arrangements. Brian explained, "Because the airport facilities are simple and have no night takeoff and landing capabilities, even if we rush back to the airport as quickly as possible after visiting the destination, it will inevitably be dark and the airport will be closed. So we definitely have to spend a day here. As for where to sleep, it depends on what the local officials arrange. I have prepared some camping equipment, which is a last resort." "Where are the captain and the flight attendants?" "I don't think they have any plans to leave." Henry asked again. Brian replied, "They'll stay at the airport to inspect and clean the aircraft. It's a desolate place, so even if they want to find a bar for a night out, it'll be hard to do. Local hotels might not be as comfortable or clean as on board. If you need to wash, you can use the airport facilities for a small fee." And keeping it on the plane can prevent the Africans from getting too excited and taking parts away, leaving the plane with only a skeleton. Henry was surprised and asked, "How could this happen?" Brian smiled and gestured around. "Look, there's no walls or wire fences around it. Anyone can enter the airport. And look under the hangar. Wherever there's a plane, there's always someone nearby." After explaining the two clues, Brian smiled and said, "This is Africa. Anything that happens here is not surprising. That's why I insisted on carrying a gun. You can choose not to use it, but you can't use it when you want to." The last sentence was addressed to Ms. Hepburn, because before departure, when Audrey heard that Brian's team wanted to bring weapons, she was somewhat disapproving. She thought that the purpose of this trip was just to see some children, so why would they bring weapons? But after seeing the UN personnel bring in armed peacekeepers, Audrey relented, asking only Brian and the others not to use guns in front of the children. After waiting for a long time, the local officials finally arrived. There were two black men, one fat and one thin. The fat one was wearing a t-shirt and suit pants made of linen. This kind of fabric was very cool and airy, and could be considered a high-quality clothing material. The thinner one, however, was a well-toned man in a camouflage shirt and jeans. If he had a machine gun and ammunition belts, he wouldn't even need to yell robbery, he'd exude the oppressive aura of a gangster. The two of them chattered for a while, speaking so fast that it sounded almost like they were arguing. Then the fat one stepped forward to greet them, saying in broken English, "Is this the UN ambassador, Ms. Hepburn, and her group? I'm your liaison officer, and the person behind you is your guide." Audrey Hepburn came out to shake hands with the other party. Seeing this scene, Henry of course did not forget to take out his camera to take pictures. Officials are said to love photos that demonstrate their achievements, but Henry noticed that the fat black man was a bit evasive in front of the camera. He didn't seem relaxed at all. After hurriedly taking the photos, Fat Black said, "Everyone, let's get going. It will take us quite some time to drive to our destination." Everyone got on the bus without objection. Fat Blackie was sitting in the jeep driven by the guide. Henry was driving a car, with old Bernie sitting in the passenger seat, and Miss Hepburn and Brian, who was responsible for protecting him, sitting in the back seat. The other car was occupied by Mark and Sam, who sat in the driver's seat and the passenger seat respectively. The back seat was filled with supplies that couldn't fit in the trunks of both cars. Without saying anything, the group drove the car out of the airport and sped towards their destination. It wasn't a problem for Mark's driving skills to keep up with the wild jeep, but what worried Brian more was Henry's driving skills. But after observing for a while, he found that Henry could follow the jeep closely for 3 cars, and they were almost in the same ruts, which was very important when following a car on an irregular road. It is obvious that Henry's driving skills are impeccable, at least for the time being they seem sufficient. But what worried Brian was that Henry could speak Somali, and his behavior over the past few days had shown that he was happy to interact with these black people. So why didn't he come over this time? Even when he spoke, he gave no indication that he could speak Somali. Perhaps other people thought that Henry was embarrassed to speak to others in his poor Somali language. But Brian felt that this was not the case. And his intuition was always accurate, especially when it came to the bad things. Day 2, to celebrate the launch, there will be an additional update at 9 p.m. Chapter 100 Child Protection Agency. Brian didn't ask his question directly in the car because he also noticed that Ms. Hepburn's assistant was intentionally or unintentionally trying to keep some inappropriate and troublesome things away from that lady. Asking the question at this time, without more evidence, would only cause the lady to worry in vain. Brian believed that this smart young man knew the limits and would not hide anything from him when it was necessary to speak. This wasn't blind trust. Rather, Brian had observed the young man's exceptionally thoughtful behavior, his ability to act and speak with perfect timing, and only then did he dare to wait for him to speak. So the security team leader simply stared out the window at the scenery, keeping an eye out for any unusual convoys approaching them and occasionally communicating with the people in the following vehicles via walkie-talkie to ensure everything was normal. Henry used his talkativeness to get old Bernie to talk about his military experience. Even though some missions are classified and cannot be discussed casually, a man's military service will inevitably have some experiences that will become a lifelong topic of conversation. Old Bernie wore the green beret longer than the other 3, and he had endless stories of fun and embarrassment to tell about his training and his experience in training new recruits. Henry played the role of a young man who knew nothing very well, and nothing that old Bernie said did not surprise him. Those jokes between men also successfully made the big star in the car laugh out loud, and he kept asking questions. With two people cheering him on, old Bernie spoke even more excitedly. He even betrayed Mark and Sam, who were not in the car, without hesitation, and revealed a series of embarrassing things they had done when they joined the army. The kind of behavior that involves using a toothbrush to clean the toilet during cleaning duty and then using it to brush your teeth at night is considered a mild case. It's not uncommon to see people at midnight emergency assemblies with steel cups on their heads and helmets in their hands, some wearing tracksuits and carrying chairs, and some wearing camouflage uniforms and carrying wash basins. Brian's mouth twitched when he heard this, and he wondered if old Bernie had any black material on him as well. Time passed in laughter and the beautiful scenery of the African savanna, and the three cars finally arrived at their destination. This child protection facility is the largest on Somalia's southwestern border. It forms the core of the community. It's easy to imagine its sheer size, as the protection facility came first and then the crowds gathered around it. But in terms of settlement size, it was barely a village. Standing at the village entrance, one could see from one end to the other. Furthermore, the houses were scattered, one on the east side and the other on the west side, with little rational planning beyond a barely sufficient path. This kind of terrain put Brian in a difficult position. It was difficult to defend, yet also prone to ambushes. The only advantage was that if the enemy tried to enter from the outside, the wide field of vision made it easy to detect them. A group of three cars drove directly into the Conservancy's main gate. It wasn't called a gate, but it was more like the cattle fences common on American ranches during the early days of the American Revolution. It was just a wooden frame that could be opened and closed. With a little effort, the car could be used to knock it out without causing serious damage, which meant it had no blocking effect. This observation comforted Brian a little. After the car stopped and everyone got out, a large group of children lined up to greet us. They clapped their hands and sang a welcome song in English. However, some of the younger children looked around, not knowing what they were doing there. The children were surrounded by several sturdy, black girls. They were both teachers and nannies. The smiles on their faces were genuine. Seeing a large group of children without any expressions of sadness or wariness of outsiders, it was clear that these children were well taken care of. Audrey Hepburn said with emotion, "Henry, look, these children are so cute." The white Hollywood star got out of the car and accepted a simple bouquet of wild flowers picked by the children nearby. He then held the hand of a little black girl and approached the other children. Henry quickly picked up his camera and started taking pictures from behind. Brian noticed that the guide's car was parked far away. Apart from the fat official who came to act as Ms. Hepburn's translator, the guide did not come over. Instead, he met and talked with the adult male who should be a member of the protection agency. Although their actions didn't seem threatening, Brian was still wary. He and Sam were responsible for carrying the supplies in the car that were to be handed over to the Child Protection Agency. Old Bernie and Mark each guarded a car. Seeing things being moved in, the older teachers beamed. Brian couldn't understand what they were saying, but from their body language, he could tell they were directing where to move things. The women didn't let the UN personnel move the supplies directly into the agency's warehouse. Instead, they placed them under the shade of a large tree. The items had to be counted, confirmed, and signed for before they could be put into storage. After all, it was established with the support of the United Nations, so some of the rules are quite strict. It was a shame I didn't get to explore the interior of the facility, but on such a hot day, saving a few steps seemed like a good idea. Even though all this seemed peaceful, Brian still felt a sense of alarm. He noticed that in front of a crude stage in the small playground where Audrey Hepburn was being led by the children, a group of men, led by the sturdy guide, also moved to a position where they could see her. When I visited other places before, these black guys would find a place to hide as soon as they had nothing to do after a certain time. No matter what they were doing, they always had to spend some time to find everyone before leaving. Sometimes they couldn't even find everyone. Fortunately, these were locals, so as soon as the UN delegation arrived and greeted the local officials, the delegation moved on. They didn't insist on gathering all the black buddies they brought with them before leaving. Have you ever been in a situation like today where you just can't leave? Yes, but they're usually local tyrants who've been paid to protect them. Their job is to maintain a strong presence within the visiting group. The wiser ones won't bother these wealthy white guys anymore. Henry was still taking pictures, but he was no longer limited to taking pictures of Ms. Hepburn. He also took some distant pictures of the Child Protection Agency while wandering around. "Mr. Mills, Henry suddenly called out, coming over. Have you seen the bag where I put the negatives? The person who was speaking was holding a camera and rewinding the film that had already been taken. Day 2, to celebrate the launch, there will be an additional update at 9 p.m. End of the chapter. Like and subscribe for more videos like this.